All right, hey people, today is April 13th, 2024. My name is Chris Lucas. This is my show, The Protestant View. I haven't done a show for a couple of weeks just because we had the eclipse coming up in Indiana. There was a lot of stuff we had to do because we had family coming all the way up here from Florida. And but one of the things I wanted to kind of just start off with right off the bat was, let me get this other screen up here so you can see what I'm talking about. I just kind of want to bring this to everyone's attention too, because this really, really bothered me. But so I posted this on my community page on YouTube. I haven't got a chance to post it on, I don't think I posted it on Facebook yet. But in Indiana, before the eclipse, it was predicted that there was going to be storms every single day. And so we were worried that we might miss the eclipse. And then I look at the weather report and it says, oh, it looks like it's going to be clear on Monday, the day of the eclipse. So I wake up, just to make sure, because we had all this family that came in from Florida, just to make sure we didn't have to drive someplace different. I woke up at 8 a.m. in the morning and I see clear blue skies. And so I go back to sleep. Then, I think my wife gets a hold of me. I work a night job. That's why I went back to sleep. So my wife comes up to me and she's like, hey, look at the skies. I'm like, what is this? And I see these crisscross patterns in the sky. And this wound up blocking the view of the eclipse. And I want to show you another, if you could see, it starts to dissipate. So you could see these are two pictures, same tree, right? So this is at 9 o'clock. Then we see this, right? So now we got this haze up in the sky that's blocking out the eclipse. And it wasn't the same, because when I saw the eclipse in Tennessee in 2017, I saw this blue ring around a very dark black circle. And even when I took pictures and video of it, you could clearly see it was an eclipse, right? It looked, but with the way this fog and haze covered the sky from jet airplanes, right? It's really weird that I never see this kind of pattern in my skies ever. Not this bad. Maybe one or two, but I saw a whole bunch of them, and it just left this fog and haze. And so when you're taking a picture, it looks like the sun's out. So you can clearly see the eclipse is happening. But when I took this same exact picture in Tennessee in 2017, you could see a ring around a dark circle. But now when I'm taking the pictures, this is what the camera's picking up because of all the haze. And it really messed up the viewing of this eclipse. And it was something that kind of made me real sad and angry. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to people's attention and then show this. I made a little short about it too. So this was earlier, but you can see they so I can't remember who took this video at my house, but someone took that, and you can see them just going through. And we could have saw a beautiful eclipse that day if it wasn't for them just deciding to spray the skies with, I don't know, is this contrails, chemtrails, whatever. It just lingered up in there. So, and no one's hardly reported this. So because no one's hardly reported this, I just wanted to bring it to people's attention that this is why you didn't see a good eclipse in Indiana, because of this nonsense. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. So today's video is, well, I do want to make one more announcement. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to have a citizen journalist on at 1 p.m. on Saturday, if everything works out. And we're going to discuss the Vatican and politics, the Catholic Church, all kinds of different subjects. I don't know if he wants me to say his name or not. This guy Steve, I met off of Facebook, man. I had a conversation with him today, and I wish I would have recorded it because I thought it was an incredible conversation. And it's really rare that you talk to someone who can see what's really going on in society and isn't fighting it. You know, it's like, and I think they're a pretty awake person. So I'm really looking forward to having them on the show and seeing how that goes. So my next thing is that this week I've been thinking a lot about Calvinism and their problem with time. And I think this is what hurts Calvinists. I think this is why Calvinists cling to their belief system as much as they do. It's because they have this incredibly messed up view of time. And just to kind of help people with how I see time is that I believe that they're like, time's not some linear thing. There's not such a thing as like a space-time continuum, and I don't believe like time is like this like tangible thing, right? You know, like some people would think of time as like everything has already happened, and the only thing time does is keep everything happening at once. So, and I wonder if the Calvinists are, when they have this deterministic view of reality, is if their way of thinking about time is similar to this theory called, let me ask the AI to help me with how to word this the best way possible. Substan Oh man, how do you say that? No, I gotta look this word up. Sorry, some of these words are kind of new to my vocabulary. I know when I'm trying to think of, and I can't think of the word. It just take me a second. Sorry. Substantivalism. So Sorry, all these words are so new to me. These are just Could you explain to me what this view is?
Certainly. Substantivalism, also known as substantialism, is a philosophical view concerning the nature of space and time. It implies that space and time exist independently of any physical objects or changes within them. According to this view, space and time are like a vast, invisible container that exists always and everywhere, providing the backdrop against which matter exists and events unfold. This concept contrasts with relational theories, which suggest that space and time are a network of relationships among objects and events, rather than entities with independent existence. Substantivalism is a key topic in the philosophy of physics, particularly in discussions about the nature of the universe and the fundamental structure of reality.
Okay, so I believe that Calvinists hold more of a view of substantialism. Sorry, these words are hard for me to pronounce. So, and the problem with holding this view is that they think space and time exist independently, whereas I think these things do not exist independently. I believe in more of a relationalism, which basically says that time and space are a network of relationships among objects and events rather than entities with independent existence. So, and the reason why this is kind of important is like someone will take an atomic clock and they'll send it far away or they'll send it up into space, or they'll just put it at a real high altitude. And then there's an atomic clock that's closer to the ground on Earth. And what many will claim is that there's a time dilation going on, right? And so they're saying that there's this real thing called time that exists outside of matter, and they'll say that because this one clock is up high where gravity least affects it, and this other atomic clock is down here where gravity affects it more. Gravity's not affecting the clocks. They say it's affecting the time. And they'll say the proof is that this atomic clock up here is in is in less gravity, and this one down here is in more gravity, and therefore gravity is warping the fabric of space and time, or something to that effect, right? And I don't believe in that. I believe what's really going on is it can be calculated using gravitational frequency adjustment, which means you're adjusting for the gravity's effects on the ticking of the atomic clock, of the atoms in the atomic clock, right? Because the atomic clock counts the tickings of an atom, right? It's like cesium. It gives off so many particles. I have it. Let me just skip over to here so I can properly talk about this. I swore I had this up on here. But anyway, I thought I had already had that brought up about the atomic clocks. But anyway, so basically these atomic clocks, they work by counting like the ticks of an atom, and it's like a I think it's like cesium atoms or something, and there's one other type they use. But anyway, so what they're saying is they're making the claim that it's because gravity's effect on time itself, and they're saying time exists independently of this world. And whereas I think all there is this moment, and basically the things in this moment, which are all the atoms and everything taking place in this moment, right? And so to me, time is where we're just kind of calculating the movements relative to we're calculating time based on the movements of other objects or changes in things relative to another object and the change in it. So, like, when we talk about hours, what's that really calculated on? It's calculated because we're dividing up the amount of time it takes the sun to go around the earth one time, right? And so you would divide that up into 24 pieces, right? And then you divide that up even more into minutes, like 60 minutes for each hour. Then you divide that even more into 60 seconds, and you keep going and going, right? But all that time is based on the movement of the sun going around the earth. And then we set our watches and everything according to that, so we all have the general feel of time. We get a general sense of this of time elapsing and all the changes going on. But I don't think time exists independently. Like if every single thing was frozen, every thought was frozen, every atomic decay was frozen, every electron spinning around an atom was frozen, everything was frozen, I don't think time would elapse, because there's nothing to there's no change has happened. Absolutely no change in the entire universe has happened, and I don't think time would have elapsed, because everything's just frozen, or it does, or maybe you could say it does elapse, but everything's still frozen, so there's really no difference in it. And the reason why I think this is important is, like, Calvinists have that view that everything is determined. So they think that God sees everything, knows the future, and then once God knows the future, it's fixed. So it has to happen the exact way God saw it. And so they will go and say that God has determined everything, so that will ever happen. All of eternity is settled. Every single thing that will ever happen is already known and settled. Whereas I think that kind of puts God in this, like, almost like you're trapping him inside of his own determinations, or like you're making it to where, like, nothing can ever change ever again. I don't know, like, I have a struggle with that, and that's why I kind of started thinking about these theories like open theism and such, because I think like, believing in a world that's open, and believing that there's only a now, and that's all I have to deal with, is, it's, to me, it's comforting, because I'm someone who actually feels nauseous thinking about infinity and eternity. And if I just think of time in this way, where I just have this moment, and nothing exists outside this moment. You had the past, and then it's like everything you do now affects your future, but you're not I guess imprisoned by the future. It's not like it's a fixed thing. So probably should try to read a little something to see if I can maybe explain this just a little bit better. So I guess the perspective I'm trying to share is this perspective of time that aligns well with this philosophical concept that some call relationalism. And in relationalism, time is not seen as an independent entity, but rather a measure of change and the relationships between events. This view contrasts with the substantialism view, where time and space are considered to be entities in their own right, existing independently of objects and events. So, from what I understand, Aristotle had a similar view, but I'm not very well studied on Aristotle. But from some of the things I've been reading, and he was considering time as a measure of change with respect to before and after. He believed that time measures change and is measured by change, emphasizing that without change, there would be no concept of time. And this is echoed by modern physics, where time is understood as a dimension in relation to objects and events. So in essence, relationalism posits that time and space are part of a network of relationships that define them. Without objects to prove a reference frame or events to mark change, time would have no meaning. This philosophical stance has been influential in the development of theories in physics, particularly those concerning the natures of space and time. All right, so I hold more to that, and I don't see the difference in whether someone believes in this thing called time dilation, which I reject, ever happens, or whether someone believes in what I would call gravitational adjustment frequency, which can account for the exact same phenomenon. So I don't have to believe that time's being bent. I just say we just use gravitational frequency adjustment due to one atomic clock being higher up, and therefore less gravity has an effect on it. And as it's closer to the Earth, it's got more, and it still meets up with my theory. Like, my theory's not thrown off. Like, oh no, why is this doing this? It's like, well, it's accounted for. It's even calculated. So I kind of reject the Calvinist notion that time even operates how they might picture it, which then really destroys a lot of their theory, because if this is the way time works, you can't say that the whole future's already happened. Then it just becomes God calculating everything perfectly. So that's how he knows what's going to happen, because he can calculate everything perfectly that's going on in the present and in the past, and he can determine the future perfectly. But he's not in bondage to what he foresees happening. And there is some scripture I want to go into later that I was like reading a verse, and it really made me think about how weak the Calvinist argument is, but I kind of just want to elaborate a little bit more on this theory. So basically what I'm trying to do is craft a theory that offers an alternative to that substantialism theory that combats determinism and fatalism, and is compatible with the concept of an open future and libertarian free will, while also aligning with biblical teachings. So that's why I'm trying to study things like structural realism as an alternative. And so I've kind of come up with this concept called dynamic theistic relationalism, because it's just a study of how what would be the best way to phrase this? I wrote this down and I gotta find it. Let's see if I can. Sorry, it's. Okay, so basically the reason why I got this name is it has the dynamic interaction between divine sovereignty and human free will, the relational aspect of time and existence, and the theistic foundation that aligns with biblical principles. So that's kind of what the whole name is trying to entail. And I'm still kind of developing this and working on this, because to be honest, it wasn't until I heard Warren McGrew, who also goes by the channel Idol Killer, I heard him debate Calvinists, and then so I go watch his channel and I find out, oh, he's an open theist. And I had thought open theism was like heresy, but I had no idea that a lot of people that had kind of taught me to think this way were also influenced by Calvinists, whether they know it or not. And I started to think more and more as about all this stuff and about time and everything. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm like, this seems to be like a real problem with Calvinism, because in Calvinism, they have these odd contradictions that don't make sense. Like, they believe God makes two determinations, and he can't make a perfect determination. I know Calvinists would be like, oh, Chris, yeah, we don't believe that. You're misrepresenting us. Okay, I'm trying not to misrepresent you, but all of you refuse to answer that last video I did. And I mean, just watch about 20 minutes of it, where I'm just going through the graphs, and I'm drawing these charts, and I'm trying to draw out how I'm viewing your ideal, right? Because you're telling me that God, before the foundation of the world, determined someone to go to heaven, and that they were always determined to go to heaven. the other person was always determined to go to hell. And then I ask you, so he doesn't save anyone, right? And then go, no, he is Savior. And I'm okay. So when was the person in danger of going to hell then? And they go, well, they weren't, because God had already determined them. So I'm like, well, then what's he saving them from? What real danger were they ever in? And then someone will say, in time, he saves them in time. And it's like, I'm really struggling with trying to understand the thinking. That's why I keep asking, please draw this out. And then a lot of them will go, oh, I can't draw it out. And I'm like, well, you can't draw it out probably because it's a contradiction and you're having trouble. It's like someone saying, you arguing that a circle is square and you can't draw it, you can't create a square circle. You don't, and it's like, but you keep wanting to argue that it's square. And then I go, well, can you draw it out for us so we can understand? And then you're like, no, I can't. And it's like, well, maybe it's a contradiction. And then you're like, no, well, then draw it out. I can't. Why? Because I just, because it's probably a nonsensical ideal you have, right? Or else you could draw it out. Because see, in my view, God can actually save people because, he creates everything perfect. He created everyone to have a relationship with him. Then there was this rebellion, right? And now, these people are stuck committing sin, right? And then God, saves them from their sin, right? And saves them from hell. He offers salvation to them. Anyone who believes in a son shall be saved. So that, and you can make a free choice to save. But see, there was also this free choice to sin, right? And then there was this free choice to accept Jesus. And some people reject it, some people don't, right? But you don't have God determining the people as to what they're going to reject and what they're not going to reject. It's like, and see, in the Calvinist view, I feel like God would have to determine everyone to go to hell, so they were actually really heading to hell. Then he would be like, you know what? I think I'll save some. So he changes his mind about sending everyone to hell, and then he decides to save people from his original determination. And I have a problem, and that doesn't sound good at a Calvinist, because then it makes God sound like, he can't make a perfect thought in the first place. Like why did he determine that? Why did he change his mind? He was going to send him to hell, and now he changed his mind. It's like, and so, and the way I view things is, I don't have God changing his mind. I have God doing something. Then I have people that did something to cause sin to enter the world. And then God is like, okay, now I'm going to remedy this. And now he could have saw this all coming, but he could still remedy it. So I don't know exactly how God perfectly calculates everything, but I leave it open that he can perfectly calculate and see that people might do this. But you actually have to let people do this before you can judge them. Like, you can't, most people don't like to be judged if they haven't even done the thing, right? If they haven't done what they did was evil, but yet they get judged for doing what's evil and they haven't even done it yet, it kind of, and most people would say that looks unjust. At least let the person, give, because you got that term, give the people some rope and let them hang themselves. So you give them the rope, and you let them do it. You don't have to. It's so basically, God can be a savior in my worldview because he's not the one who determined that I sin in the first place. He's not the one who made me sin. And then he didn't also determine, he left it up to me whether I was going to accept him. And now we can actually have a real relationship with God, because you can't have a relationship there's just so many inconsistencies with the Bible if God's getting upset, but yet a Calvinist would say, well, God's kind of getting upset with himself because he determined the people not to believe in him, and now he's getting angry at those people for not believing in him, but yet he determined them not to believe in him. So, and God's just so mad at what God did not do. It feels like God's just getting mad at himself, and this isn't a real relationship. And that's where I start to have problems with the whole Calvinistic ideals and thoughts. And I want to make sure I just bring this up before I let this video get too long. You know, there's this parable of the lost sheep. And I was kind of imagining, and I got this new project I'm working on, and that's going to feature this in a debate. But in this parable of the lost sheep, you know, we have Jesus saying, what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, assuredly I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. So now, if you think about this from a Calvinistic perspective, you have this one sheep that's going astray. And God determined that sheep's going to go astray. He determines it, right? And now he's going to go seek after that one sheep that he determined that would go astray. And now when he finds it, it says if he should find it. So think about that one for a second. If he should find it, assuredly, I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep than the 99 that did not go. So hold on, wait a minute. So God determines that sheep to go astray. Then he finds it. And then because he made it go astray, he determined it to go astray. Then he goes, finds it, and he rejoices more over it. Then, I mean, I just cannot imagine me, I don't know, like, let's say I had a gold coin and I just fling that gold coin or something, or I have a cat, right? Like, let's say I got a kitten and I do what I can to make sure that kitten just goes away from me. And I'm the one who scared it away or did whatever. It runs away. And then I'm like, man, I think I'm gonna go find it, and then I go rejoice over it. Like, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. I guess it's even worse than that though, because God's determining all their desires, everything they're gonna feel and think, everything they're gonna do. It's almost like a VR headset where you have like some author from a book or a movie. You know, someone makes a movie. And he's got all the characters' roles, every single emotion every character is going to feel, every single thought that the character is going to think, already planned out. And then he puts a VR headset on you where you totally forget about your present life, and your conscience is totally gone about your present life, and all you have is that character's conscience in that that virtual reality headset who's going through this movie, and everything's like perfectly determined as far as what they're going to feel and everything. And I don't know, it's so hard for me to think that you can hold that person accountable for everything they experience and feel when you sat there and determined every single thing about it. But I want to just bring up something else I was thinking about. And sorry, this is I know it's a little bit of a disjointed video. I haven't done a video in a couple of weeks because I've been busy and it's hard to properly prepare anything because I didn't prepare very well. It's really hard because the stuff I want to do, it would take me hours to plan out, and I just don't have hours. I'm working a job. I have these notes, and it's like I'm trying not to overwhelm people with everything I got written down. and trying to simplify it. And it's kind of like a lot of work on my mind as I'm trying to sort through all this and say what I want to say without getting into the weeds of other thoughts. Let's see if I can get, because right now I'm working on like kind of like kind of like a Calvinist debate animation, because I don't think I'm ever going to have the time to plan out a debate with a Calvinist. I don't even know if I can get a Calvinist to debate me on the things I need them to debate me on. And so what I'm doing is I'm working on another project that I think would be a lot more beneficial and edifying, because then you wouldn't have anyone trying to waste time or getting sidetracked in these debates where sometimes they pretend like they're dumb about something, like James White did in his recent debate with Leighton Flowers. He kind of act dumb about a subject. I can't remember it right off the top of my head. Like he never covered it before or never thought about it, and he wouldn't answer Leighton. And then later on, I think like Leighton kind of showed where he actually did talk about it before and did answer it. So it's like, well, why didn't you want to answer it in the debate? So it's just seemed like dishonest debate tactics by people sometimes. So I think I have a workaround with that, in a way of presenting this information to where it's presented in a debate form, where you can see the right kind of pushback, and you can see strong arguments, and then you can see the way these arguments are approached and handled, and how to properly handle them. And that way someone's got like a reference point for if they ever encounter these same questions, if they're talking to someone, or maybe they're trying to work out something within their own mind, and maybe they only can think of a thought to a certain level, and I'm trying to help them think beyond that level of thinking. That way they have the most complete thinking behind that thought before they make a determination as whether, to believe it, accept it, or explore it more, or let it go. But as far as the parable of the lost sheep, it represents a challenge to the Calvinist interpretation of predestination. If the shepherd represents Jesus, he is seeking one of the lost sheep. It seems contradictory to suggest that the shepherd himself determined the sheep to get lost. This portrayal of God appears inconsistent with his character as revealed in the Bible. It also seems irrational and nonsensical to rejoice over finding what one has determined to lose in the first place. Furthermore, if the shepherd is determining the sheep to be found and rejoices over it, why not determine all the sheep to be found and rejoice over them too? Why would the shepherd choose to determine some to be lost, then determine himself to feel lost? This seems to contradict the biblical depiction of a God who desires all to come to repentance. But so, basically in that parable, if God's going to rejoice over more over the one that was lost and that he finds it, then why not determine the other 99 to get lost so you can rejoice even more, right? And you find them too. So there's just some odd things I'm not quite getting with this whole Calvinism. And that's kind of why I thought of this whole time theory, and I need to kind of tweak it more. And I'm hoping to have a couple of open theists on to discuss this at some point soon. I was trying to get some people on today, but I think I gave them too short notice. But anyway, a Calvinist might, if I bring up this parable to them, some have responded the parable is not about God causing the sheep to get lost. It's about God's sovereignty and salvation. The lost state of the sheep represents humanity's fallen condition. The shepherd's rejoicing is not because he caused the sheep to be lost, but because he has sovereignly chosen to save it. You hear these responses and it's like, okay, so he did not cause the sheep to be lost. Is not rejoicing because he caused the sheep to be lost. Yeah, I agree. He's not. It even says here he's not rejoicing because he caused it to be lost, but him causing it to be lost led to him rejoicing over it being found. and 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 it's like the Calvinist is like not getting it. It's like, no, he's rejoicing because he has sovereignly chosen to save it, and it's like, and you sovereignly chose to save something that you sovereignly determined to lose. And I don't know. I mean, maybe God likes battling himself. Is that what the Calvinists believe? And God's always having like these inner battles with himself. Like, oh, can God make a rock too big to lift? And God goes and lifts it, and and he's always doing these things with himself. But like I said, this interpretation it still represents a problem. If the shepherd has the power to prevent the sheep from getting lost or to ensure that they are found, why would he choose to let them be lost at all? The joy of finding the lost sheep suggests that the individual sheep has intrinsic value, and the shepherd's actions are motivated by love, not by a predetermined plan to lose then find. Right. So why is he rejoicing over this sheep that he found? See, is that because all these people are just, dirt and they're all the same? And because a Calvinist basically makes it sound like salvation's a divine lottery. Like, oh, you didn't do anything. There's nothing, no action, no relational aspect about you whatsoever that helped you develop a relationship with God or anything like that. There's nothing, there's no response by you that helped cause anything. And so they basically look at people like dirt, like everyone's dirt, right? Because you've heard like Calvinists been in a church, oh, that baby's a dirty, disgusting sinner. You know what? And those kinds of things get me sick, because it's like, I was always taught to protect the innocents, like, oh, let's guard their innocence. When a child, I've heard adults say some very horrible jokes around children, like off-color jokes, I'll put it that way to be mild. And that child has got you can tell he's saying innocent things because he's not thinking you mean the dirty things you mean behind those jokes, right? You're the one who's dirty, not that child. The child's innocent. But the Calvinist will sit there and like, that disgusting, dirty baby. And it's like, it just kind of irks me, just to hear that sort of talk. Because it's like, no, I mean, we know it's natural to protect the innocence of children. You know what? There's even atheists that think that. Like that's a natural thing. Even though atheists don't have like a ground to stand on as far as like the truth behind such a statement. It's not grounded in anything, but they kind of get that sense of like sometimes. But what was my point? Yeah. So anyway, intrinsic value. So we know that he's rejoicing because that sheep has some intrinsic value to him. Like, it's not like there's some aspect of it that was worth saving, that he wanted to save, because he loved us, and he doesn't just love dirt, I mean, we might have done something wrong, but because we are his creation, he's seeking to help redeem us from what we did that was wrong. But why would he do that if we didn't have any value at all? And I think we obviously have value to him, or else he wouldn't have given his only son, or his son wouldn't have, given himself. So anyway, then Calvinists might respond something to like the intrinsic value of the sheep is not in question, which I've had some say this to me. It's like, but I think it is, but they don't answer. They'll just make a statement like that, and it's like that statement in of itself doesn't even like I don't even understand anything behind that statement. Like, when you tell me the intrinsic value of the sheep is not in question, okay, and I mean, how so? What is the intrinsic value then? And it's like I'm having a hard time getting them to give me a good response on this, and so I'm going to seek that more. But anyway, it says, and they'll say something like, the fallen condition of humanity necessitates the shepherd's action to save. The joy comes from the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan, which is to save his elect from among the lost. But it seems like, didn't he determine that to happen? And then I don't know. Like, I still struggle with trying to understand that. Anyway, I would just probably say that, this view still fails to capture the fullness of God's love as depicted in the Bible. A shepherd who truly values his sheep would not predetermine their loss. Okay, so I really want to stress that. A shepherd who truly values his sheep would not predetermine their loss. The biblical narrative consistently shows us God's initiative in seeking and saving the lost, which implies a genuine desire for all to be saved, not just a select few. I challenge the Calvinist view on the grounds of God's love and character, of God's character and love, arguing that the biblical portrayal of God as shepherd who seeks and saves the lost suggests a universal desire for salvation rather than a predetermined plan that excludes from the possibility of being found. So, and I always see these Calvinists and they just seem to overemphasize God's sovereignty and seem so hyper focused on it. And yet they do it to the harm of expressing God's character of love. And it just seems like it's always like God's power, God's authority, God's sovereignty, but it's like the God they create is it seems cold, lacks love, lacks logic, seems double-minded because they always have to come up with God's got two wills. He's got this one will that you can see, and then he's got this like secretive will. And I don't know, there's just so much that just doesn't make sense. But I have all these notes written down, and I have to really sit there and write out like a dialogue of like the best things I've heard a Calvinist try to argue with me versus my replies versus replies other people read concerning the same thing. And so I'm trying to organize it into like kind of like a debate format so people can read it, see all these answers, see how they would approach the subject, and maybe make it a little bit more edifying than just than what debates typically tend to be. Because I honestly have heard tons of debates. I probably watch about 50 hours of debates a week, besides other things because I watch a lot of things at 2 times speed. I work. That's one of the few things I can do while I'm at work. And when I'm hearing a lot of debates, it's like there's only like parts of it where you really feel like they're really engaged. Like you'll watch almost a 3-hour debate, and there's only like maybe a 15 minutes of it that's like really engaging. And then you don't even feel like they really hit that point hard enough, the most engaging point. So I'm just trying to rework everything to where that part is highlighted and explored more and deeper. So, oh, God is open. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, can you come on? Oh, whoa, whoa. Sorry, man. I had like another screen up. Man, if you can come on, that would be great. Like, because you've actually been one of the people that have inspired me also, besides Warren McGrew. It's like if I didn't hear both of you people talk, and the other one's Rhoda. Rhoda was probably like the last little bit that really kind of like got me to think about this whole concept of open theism. Like, it's totally new to me. Like, I've only been like thinking about this for the past few months, like maybe 6 months at most. Because I think that's back when I first subscribed to your channel, whenever I subscribed to it, and I've been watching a lot of your videos. And this guy right here, God is Open, this channel, great. He's got a lot of great things as far as like Calvinism goes. Still exploring a lot of other things he teaches. But I love this Matt Slick debate. It's a shame that got taken down, because it wasn't really as bad as the Gospel Truth made it sound, which the Gospel Truth, the channel that hosted that debate. But it's like I did not think it was as good until like I've heard people kind of talk, watch it again, and then kind of like have conversations about it and things. And I'm like, okay, now I kind of get this and this and this about it. Yeah, I probably I should have probably asked you, man. I'm sorry. I should have probably told you I was gonna do this show and see if you could have came on. But anyway, there's this oh, what is it? I don't want to get too lost in other topics. So while I'm waiting for him to maybe come on. Oh, there he is. Don't want to get too
Hey,
Chri Fisher.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going all right. Okay, now the echo's gone. Okay, I just want to make sure I was gone.
Well,
so,
yeah,
hey, man, it is great to have you on.
background.
You've been one of the people that's inspired me to look more into this topic, and you and Warren McGrew. I'd probably say Warren McGrew is the most, just because I found him first and kept kind of listening to them, and then later stumbled on you. But
oh yeah,
yeah, I find this topic. I didn't really think how important this topic is, especially concerning theories about time and everything like that also, because I've had things where anxiety thinking about eternity, infinity, and I think when you have that Calvinistic view of time, where they think time is like some separate entity, like time and space exist, have their like own existence, it kind of it kind of nauseates me to think about that. Whereas if I just think more about like a presentism sort of view, or a relationalism sort of view, that puts me more at ease. It puts my mind more at ease. And it feels like I'm more grounded. But anyway, feel free to share whatever your thoughts you might have right now. And
yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like you're in Wolf's Rain is an anime, and the whole premise of it is like time is circular. If you get to the end of the anime, and that's kind of like how they view the world, is like there's some sort of separate circle of reality that exists in its own entity that's co-eternal with God. Yeah, I like it.
is this it right here?
Yeah, it's a fun one, but it's weird that their concept of time, in which just everything's kind of faded, and it's like what you're saying, like a crystalline entity or something that exists basically on its own. But yeah, I think presentism is more intuitive. It's what we experience, and to overcome what we experience probably should take substantial evidence. And the biblical authors don't think like this. They don't have time travel. They don't have God like peering into the future to figure out things to do in the past, anything like that. They exist entirely in a presentist world. There's cyclical aspects about time that they draw into, like patterns repeat themselves throughout time, but it's not a metaphysics of time in which time is itself not present, right?
Right. Oh man, there's something I wanted to say, and I'm spacing it. Oh gosh, man, because you said something earlier, and I wanted to say something. I wanted to let you talk, and I really spaced.
About the idea of time being its own entity, being strange. I don't know. Co-eternal with God.
Yeah, I mean, okay. See, my view is like I wouldn't believe in something called like time dilation, because some people say like when an atomic clock is up at a higher altitude and then one's lower, that because they're one's slightly going faster than the other one, the one at the higher altitude's going faster, that that gravity is having an effect on time. Whereas I would say it's more of the gravitational, you could use gravitational frequency adjustment in order to account for the difference. And I think it's more of just the gravity having an effect on the atoms itself rather than time itself, which is what they would say. And they would make that case that there's like time existing outside of as a separate entity.
The classic clock thing is the twin paradox, where you send one twin off in a spaceship traveling at near speed of light, and then you calculate all the signals back and forth, and they say it can turn out that when the twin gets back from their return trip, maybe that return twin is 20 years older than that first twin, just physically. They've aged that much more because they've experienced that much time. And so I think things like that are possible. I think we ourselves experience weird time effects. Like I took a nap and that went by just instantly. When you play video games, it just zooms by. And then if you're out working, like mowing the lawn, that takes a long time, longer than playing video games, same amount of time. So I think we could experience time in different ways. I think that definitely is a possibility, but it's all presentism. All those moments of time, they correlate and add up at a one-to-one basis with other moments in time. It's not like one of those twins in that paradox have time traveled or anything. They've all experienced the same sequence of time that can be mapped one-to-one to the other person's timeline.
All right. Man, I don't really know what else to say. I just kind of I don't know. I mean, do you got anything to throw out? Because my audience is probably pretty new to this topic as far as open theism. They're every bit as new as I am to it, if not newer.
Yeah, open theism is just the idea that God is active, living, and dynamic. It's the rejection of Greek philosophical constructs that really took root in the church in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries AD. This is when Platonism was vogue. And so Nietzsche wrote that Christianity is Platonism for the people. And what he's referring to is basically Christianity is like a dumbed down Platonism. And that's really what it became in the 3rd century with people like Augustine incorporating he bragged about it. These people loved it. They bragged about it. They loved quoting Plato. They loved talking about Plato. This was not a secret to them. It's a secret to us today because people don't like that unfavorable element of the Christian history. But Augustine's friends would say, hey, we love it. Your writings are full of Christ, full of Plato, and full of Plotinus, who is a Neoplatonist philosopher that lived shortly before Augustine. And so these ideas, Augustine tells us what he learned from the Platonists. And it's the ineffable type of attributes from God, that God is incorporeal, that God it exists in infinity, that he doesn't have relationship or parts, that he is immutable. These types of concepts, that's what he expressly tells us in his confessions. That's what he learned from the Platonists. And so it's not a secret. We could just look at history and see how this works. And the layman at that time he's preaching to, they didn't believe these things. Right. So these people come in, these doctors of church history, the people who wrote Christian history, and they were preaching something vastly different than what the laymen at the time believed. Remember, in 300 or 400 AD, there was a huge riot because there was a bishop who tried to incorporate Origen of Alexandria's ideas that God is incorporeal. And so there was a riot. He was threatened to be killed, and he finally had to basically swear off Origen of Alexandria. Origen of Alexandria was a big influence on Augustine as well. So there's a good book about that, The Influence on a Young Augustine of Origin of Alexandria, which talks about these things. They're all interlinked.
Yeah, and haven't you wrote books, right? Because your channel's still new to me, and I think I heard you bring up that you wrote a book.
Yeah, I wrote the book God is Open, so you could go find that on Amazon. If you type in Open Theism, it'll be one of the first books on that page. And so you could get it for free if you go to academia.edu. You could just download the PDF if you want a digital version, or you could get the Kindle version or a hard copy. And so that's a pretty sizable document. But what that is it's a scholarly study on the Bible. It doesn't assume the Bible's true, doesn't try to systemize the Bible. It tries to discuss what each individual author thought about God in their individual context. So it's a very systematic way to go through various authors in the Bible and extract their conceptions without an eye to systematics. And so it's the last chapter in the book that actually starts going over, if we want to systemize these thoughts, what would that kind of look like?
And how long have you been an open theist?
Well, basically my whole life. So my dad was he was a Greek student of Bob Hill from Derby Bible Church in Denver, and Bob Hill was a fairly influential open theist in certain circles. He wrote the book Things That Differ about dispensationalism, and Bobby Enyart was associated with him. And let's see, and who else? Well, those are the big names.
All right, yeah, because to me, this topic, I remember just maybe a year ago, someone said, "Oh, so and so's an open theist," and I mean, my automatic response, because the person was already teaching other heretical, like things that I thought were off anyway, and so when they put open theist on them on top of it all, I was automatically just like, "Oh, there's another heretical thing," and it never even occurred to me that all this stuff was that to ever even think about this in any deeper level, like I said, until I came across Warren and started thinking more and more about that Calvinist and the Calvinism view of reality, and and how close theism seems to kind of like favor their view. And then I started seeing how, well, if open theism's an actual possibility, then you could really nip this Calvinism, and the bud, and really do away with it, because that means that their whole construct of time doesn't even lead to validating their theological view. So
Yeah, so open theist is a broad label, and so it's going to be applied to biblical open theists, philosophical open theists, theistic like leftists or progressives, people who don't even believe the Bible but endorse relational theology. And so it's such a broad label that you never know who you're going to get if someone's labeled an open theist. It could be someone who just hates the Bible, embraces feminist theology, things like that. Like my sister's professor at Augustana, she called herself an open theist. It's like, this lady hates God. How is she an open theist? But that label can apply to her as well. It's just anyone who's denying these Platonistic attributes, which is wide swaths of people. So that's why I like to specify that I'm a biblical open theist. So I'm a more fundamentalist individual, and I'm less philosophical than most that you're going to be meeting.
Oh gosh, man, I'm really sorry. I don't know why my mind is like so spacey today. Too many long falls, and I think I might have to close this show down because I can't really. Oh, Platonism. That's what I want to ask you. What is that? Because that's a brand new thing to me.
All right. So Plato, of course, lived about 400 BC, and he put together a system of theology that was disparaging of the Greek gods. He didn't like the Greek gods. In his Republic, he writes that all those myths about the Greek gods would be banned. He'd replace them with better ideas. And in his Republic, he puts out this formula that since God is perfect, and if God could change, the change must be for the better or for the worse. And he can't be for the better because he's already perfect. And if it's for the worse, then he's not God. So God can't change, right? And so this formulation has been adopted by Christians. You pull up almost any systematic theology, it'll have this formation about change, this change language, and they've incorporated it into their Christianity. There's no such thing as like lateral changes or anything like that. He had ideas about God, that God was the one. And so if you hear the title, The One, that's associated with Plato or Neoplatonism, in which he talks about God being partless. Because what do parts do? If you have Legos and they have parts, the parts can come across. If you have a transformer and it has arms and legs, you can move those and they become different. And all those things, parts cause change. It doesn't have to be physical parts. It could be purely metaphorical or not metaphorical, but like abstract or metaphysical parts. If there's parts, then there's change, and then God can become not God. He can become not less than perfect. Therefore, God can't have those parts. And so he built this abstract idea of God in which God can't be related at all to the world because that causes dependencies, and dependencies cause change. And this was adopted by a whole host of individuals, notably Philo of Alexandria, who was first century AD, contemporary with Paul and Jesus, but he basically systematized. The saying was either Philo Platonizes or Plato Philizes. And so it's like all his readers thought he's basically interchangeable with Plato. And of course, he's drawing on Plato. Plato was prior to him, but he takes Plato and makes it systematic. And then who draws on that? Clement of Alexandria. Clement of Alexandria is a famous Neoplatonist Christian philosopher who's also inspiration, and Origen of Alexandria draws on, and then Augustine after him draws on them. So all these ideas about God being unable to be described, being ineffable, being immutable, being outside of time. We see Plato talk about timelessness in his Timaeus, where God can't have befores or afters because those cause parts. And Augustine writes the exact same thing in his Confessions chapter 11, where God can't even speak in time. When God says, "This is my beloved son," Augustine says that was an animal pre-programmed in time to make those words, because God can't actually act in time. So it has to be this kind of predestined, simulated type of event, which doesn't actually represent God thinking or talking or doing anything, because of course time means change. Time causes parts. Time degrades God, so God can't be related at all into these elements. So this is Platonism, and the number one systematizer of Platonism was Plotinus, who was a direct inspiration for Augustine. So Augustine said that he started out as a Christian, a layman, but he converted away from Christianity, and he went and he found Platonism. And he loved Platonism. He said he could get all his philosophy from Platonism, but he needed some sort of element, a divine spark. And so when he converted to Christianity, he converted only after Simplicanus and Ambrose told him to read the Bible in light of Plotinus, and he gladly did that. And he found Jesus to be this divine spark. And what Platonism is it sets up this practical theology in which you try to reascend to God. Everything flows down from God in this hierarchical fashion. And the goal of a good Platonist is to reascend that hierarchy to get as close to God as possible. There's really no mechanism to do that, but Augustine thought he found it in Jesus. Jesus is a lightning spark that comes from a different hypostasis, higher hypostases, that allows us to transcend back towards that one. So he taught this introspective meditation, trying to return to God. And he writes about his various attempts at this introspective meditation in his Confessions. Again, a lot of this stuff is in his Confessions, in which he tries to reattain to God, see God within his mind's eye. If you're reading Confessions and you see language like, "Oh, I saw this in my mind's eye," that's part of his ascent, his introspective meditation to try to return to God. It's Platonist theology. It's not Christian theology. Augustine says, that the Bible is absurd until he read it in light of Platonism. And but Platonism had all its theology correct, except for it didn't give the one thing that Platonism was lacking, and that was Jesus. He calls it charity or love, depending on that translation, and that was that enabling spark that the Platonists did not have. And so it's a complicated theology, and a lot of people don't understand it or misrepresent it. But Augustine adopted it wholeheartedly, incorporated it into Christianity, and here we are a couple thousand years later, and people are basically sold into the idea, the depiction of the Platonist depiction of God, whereas they've abandoned other stuff like introspective assent.
See, I'm just starting to realize how much of this this sort of thinking has been put upon us without us even knowing it. And just, for all these years, because I'm almost 49. Well, I am 49 years old. And I'm thinking that, and I'm not realizing that a lot of these concepts are not in the Bible. But, when you go to church, when you're a small child and you're raised around it, and it starts to become like normalized thinking, and you kind of get conditioned not to question it and things until you hear someone that seems pretty intellectually honest and seems pretty smart, and then you hear them start to talk about this, and you're like, wait, is there something is there something else that's not in the Bible that I'm believing? So that's kind of how it is for me to like hear all this stuff. It's new. There's a lot of things you're saying and a lot of new words. I'm pretty sure these words, because you study this subject, these words just roll off your tongue like nothing, and it's just like me saying the word "the" and this, and so I'm trying to grasp onto everything you're talking about and the meanings of the words and all that, because some of this is when it's particularly just built around this kind of ideals. I'm not familiar with these words that are normally within this space of discussion. So that's another thing with me, is I'm trying to. It's a lot. I mean, I know it becomes nothing because you've probably been doing this for many years, but like for me, like I said, I'm new, and it's like I hear Platonism and all this stuff, and I'm trying to like. So it's really fascinating. It's really interesting, man.
Yeah, Undevelopment Over the Comments says, sounds like the universe would be a portion of God for it to get back to or retain to that status. Yeah, in Plotinus's idea of creation, you'll find this in Origen as well, and in Augustine. Creation is basically an overflow from God. So while it doesn't change God, there's a level of reality that spawns in because he overflows in some capacity, but it doesn't change him at all, and he's completely separate from it. And from that, there's a further descent. And so Origen of Alexandria thinks that the Genesis account is describing initial creation of like image beings at a higher hypostasis, and it's after the fall that the physical world is created. And so there's these different levels of reality that you're trying to re-attain to. And so that's the interesting thing about the Gnostics. And so if you start reading into different ideas about the Gnostics, you'll hear about various emanations. Like the Valentinians had, I don't know, like 50 different emanations. But the idea of these emanations was they were trying to separate God from the material world. The material world is changed. The material world is corruption. The material world decays. And so their idea is the more levels you put between God and creation, the more holy God is going to be, the more insulated he is from that corrupted world. And so when you read Gnostic literature, just think about that's their goal in these things. And when they start describing God, it's always in these purely Platonic forms. And so those are going to be the earliest formulations of Platonist descriptions of God in that literature.
All right, that's pretty interesting. I'm definitely going to have to go back and listen to this with like a dictionary. And explore these concepts, because but yeah, I really appreciate you even coming on and sharing all this information, because like I said, this is new to me, and it's really nice to have like a book author just randomly come on here, and especially someone that really knows the subject well. Yeah. So this was a pleasant surprise, and I'm thankful for that.
So here's Gnosko the blessed, and so just think about this. When I read it, does it sound like the Bible? Does it sound like any of the authors of the Bible? Does anyone talk like this? All right, he who is ineffable, no principle knew him, no authority, no subjection, nor any creature from the foundation of the world, except he alone, for he is immortal and eternal, having no birth, for everyone who has birth will perish. He is unbegotten, having no beginning, for everyone who has beginning has an end. No one rules over him. He has no name, for whatever has a name is the creation of another. He is unnameable. He has no human form, for whatever has human form is a creation of another. He has his own semblance, not like the semblance we have received and seen, but a strange semblance that surpasses all things and is better than the totalities. It looks to every side and sees itself from itself, like God knows himself, actually. He is infinite. He is incomprehensible. He is imperishable and has no likeness to anything. He is unchanging good. He is faultless. He is everlasting. He is blessed. He is unknowable, while nonetheless knows himself. He is immeasurable. He is untraceable. He is perfect, having no defect. He is imperishably blessed. He is called Father of the universe. Before anything is visible among those that are visible, the majesty and the authorities that are in him, he embraces the totalities of the totalities, and nothing embraces him. For he is all mind, thought, and reflecting, considering, rationality, and power. They are all equal powers. They are all sources of the totalities, and their whole race to the last is in the foreknowledge of the unbegotten, for they had not yet come to visibility. And so this you're going to find that description almost verbatim in various Gnostic texts. That's their idea of God. And you see those Platonic categories. When they start talking about things that are named have decay and destruction, when they start talking about how body parts lead to decay, those are not biblical attributes. Paul says that when we get spiritual bodies, we're going to be immortal, because it's okay to have bodies and be a spirit being. The divine part of our spiritual bodies, that's what causes immortality, not some weird random idea that parts cause decay. That's not a biblical notion. So where do they get these ideas? They're coming from Plato, and eventually Plotinus. Of course, Plotinus is after Eugosto the Blessed, but that was the thought current in those days, trying to create a God that meets certain metaphysical criteria, and it's very subjective stuff too. They think that there's some sort of metaphysical value system, and God has to reach the top of that value system, like the Calvinist, who will say, if God learned something, then he's become a better God. Okay, by whose standards? Your weird metaphysics that somehow exist in the ether? That's not a Semitic value. It's not a value that the Bible embraces. This idea that you become better by learning a fact, that's not within their value system, but it is within the Platonist value system, because God would lack something before that he gains now, making him a better God. And because God has to be the maximally perfect being, those things can't exist. And so he can't actually acquire new information. He can't acquire new experiences. They don't believe God has experiences. They don't believe that Jesus becoming flesh and dying gives a new experience to God that he didn't have before. They don't believe God has that type of experiential knowledge. That has to be a completely different type of knowledge for the divine data set.
So a growth of knowledge is a big no-no for them.
Right.
Like, okay, because that's kind of that was like a cause like that was like a wow thing when you said that, because I didn't realize that, but now that you said it, it makes a lot of sense that as to why they think that God has to have everything determined for all of eternity. So he knows every single atom, how it's going to swing, every single thought someone's going to have from, all eternity. And it's all planned out, because for him not to know every single thing that's ever going to happen in eternity, and for all of eternity not to be settled, that would require that God's not perfect, because that means he gained knowledge, because he gained some new gained, even if it didn't make him any more wiser or anything like that, just the fact that he gained knowledge or
even the knowledge changes. And so Warren McGrew saying that God knows things in an indeterminate state and then it moves to a determinate state, That's still a change. That still violates immutability, still violates simplicity, still violates their perfect being theology. It creates change, and change is equal to decay in their minds.
Okay, I'm definitely going to have to think about this 118 to 120-minute mark again when I watch this, because I think this is like a really big deal in understanding like the Calvinist thought process and how they view like all their determinism.
Right. There's reasons for the things that they believe, and they're quite often not forthright in explaining why they believe what they do and why they hate open theism so much. It's because Norman Geisler is fairly open about it in his book, Creating God in the Image of Man, very good book against open theism. He basically says it redefines God and attacks all these properties. God's no longer pure act, pure actuality. God's no longer a say, as they say. It adds potentiality into God. And what is potentiality? That means change. Like you roll a dice, there's potential it's 1, there's potential it's 3, things like that. There's different branches it could go. Creates change in God. God's not the perfect being anymore. And God decays. God can no longer be God in those situations.
So I was just kind of reading what under development teams, because he said they were making an impersonal God that we could not have a relationship with. That God would not want us to be his children. The statement God can't violates immutability.
Yeah, so they do have to prioritize God's omnipotence, and so you'll ask someone if God can decide not to know something, and they'll say, "Well, that's the same thing as God creating a rock so big that he can't lift it. It's an internal violation." No, it's not an internal violation. I cannot know things, and I can sin, right? So if God can't not know things, and if God can't sin, those are actual limitations that I, as a creature, it's not an internal contradiction. They just don't like those things. And so they need some sort of system to prioritize God's attributes in a way that kind of meets their definition of perfect God. But really, God, in their view, has no potency. God can't actually do anything because he's stuck in time. He's just a world machine, an asset of the world, co-eternal, co-necessary with everything else that exists. For all intents and purposes, in Calvinism, God doesn't exist because he's just an immutable, whatever, fate machine that just makes the world happen as if he didn't exist to have volition or input in the first place. Nothing can change. Everything has to be the way it is.
How perfectly said, man. That's brilliant. Because I have made this one video about because I was trying to have like an open debate with some Calvinists on my channel, and none came on. But one of the video clips I wound up playing that day was where there's this atheist, and one of them's like has been on like the Modern Debate channel or something like that. And anyway, he's talking. So these two atheists are talking, and they said, and one of them said something about how they view evolution as being like the first blow to Christianity. And they said that free will is like the final blow they need to end Christianity. And so I thought what you just said there kind of matches that belief, because it's like basically what Calvinism does make me feel like God's captive, and God's pretty much almost like non-existent and dead in Calvinism, because he's captive to everything he's already determined. So it's almost like, you took Han Solo and you froze him. It's like, and he's just stuck like that forever. It's like he done determined this, and he's stuck because he determined everything and he's stuck. This is stuck. Everything's like this. It's all frozen almost.
And it's a timeless decree. So it's not something he actually decreed. It's a co-eternal decree with himself that wasn't an action. And so what kind of decree is that? It doesn't sound like a decree to me. And so everything's just co-eternal and co-necessary with God in that model.
Could you rephrase that a little bit? Because my mind didn't quite catch it. And I feel like you said something profound there, but I didn't quite catch it.
can't have befores and afters. He can't be in time. So he can't actually make a decision to create the world. And so the decision to create has to be not like what we think of as a decision where you're picking between options. It just has to be some sort of fated necessity that just exists. That's not part of God's volition. God can't think through things and pick between options because that's potentiality. That adds branching paths, possibilities, and God being a being of pure act and pure simplicity can't have those branching possibilities. So their eternal decree is not a decree. It's just coincidentally co-eternal fate with God that just exists.
All right, man. I got it that time. You did good. That was good. I caught that, and I appreciate you rephrasing that so I could comprehend what you're saying, man. That's really good, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So everything needs to be rephrased in Calvinism when they're reading the Bible. And so when they're reading Isaiah and it says, I declare the things before they happen, they think that he doesn't actually declare. They redefine what he's talking about declaring things. He's actually talking about declaring things. He made a decision and he declared it. And who did he declare it to? He declared it to the people. They have to substitute it with a non-declaration, an eternal fated thing that they call a decree, that they call a determination, but which really functionally isn't. So it's part of the Calvinist hijacking of language to make things mean something completely different than what you would think by the normal use of the word. It's like when they redefine foreknowledge, God knowing something before it happens, or predestination, God bringing something about or predetermining to bring that thing about. They think those things are timeless. They don't think that God has actions. They don't think that God has befores and afters. They don't think God can know something before that thing happens because God is timeless. All these words have to be redefined into something that is not accessible to normal reading individuals because it needs to fit their model, which is not intuitive. And so it's this stealth bait and switch. They're like, oh yeah, we believe in predestination. They really don't. You go grab Bavinck's systematic theology. He says, technically speaking, nothing is predestined because that word just doesn't fit their model of God.
I like what undevelopment team said. Like most cults, they have to tell you the real truth.
All right, so I do got to run pretty quickly.
But hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, man. I hope to have you on again and talk about this more. But thank you so much for even coming on here for a few minutes, man.
Yeah, that sounds good. All righty, well, I will be catching you later.
All right, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, hey, thank you, man. Okay, yeah, very brilliant stuff, man. That really helped me because I've been working through trying to, I guess like get develop my thought process behind this, and that was quite the help. So, Connor McElroy. Yeah, I agree with you on development team. He was a great guest. I really didn't even expect that. I mean, I knew he was pretty smart, but I was like, wow, that his ability to even catch what I was having trouble with understanding and being able to rephrase it and put it in a way so I could understand it. I really appreciate that, man. I also appreciate his patience because he knows I'm kind of like new to this subject, and just to share all that with me. And maybe I can have him and Warren McGrew, Idol Killer, on sometime, and talk about the subject more, especially after I develop my thoughts behind it more. And now he kind of gave me like a basis to kind of expand upon. So, but hey, Connor, I don't know what you exactly mean by Romans. I'll bring it up because I'm not really sure what you're getting at. Romans 8:28. Let me look through. Oh, I'm gonna get the whole passage. I'll just read NIV. I don't feel like searching. So So it says, and we know that in all things God works for the good and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, that he might be firstborn among the many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called, and those he called, he also justified, and those he justified, he also glorified. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Yeah, I guess I would. I mean, if you're trying, I don't know if you're a Calvinist or not. Say the golden chain of redemption in verse 29. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son. Yeah, I'd have to go look that up because I'm not 100% sure how I would. I might have wrote something down if I can. I don't know if I've got it in my notes or not. I'll search. It's because it looks like something I went over recently, but if I gotta search through my notes too much, I don't have like just because I read this stuff. I think I read this last night actually and wrote some stuff down about it, but I can't even remember it today. Of like, because like I said, I'm trying to. This. So while Romans 8:29 through 30 does speak of predestination, okay, so the way my dynamic theistic relationalism theory would work would be would be like these verses in the light of God's relational structure or relational nature. The term foreknew suggests a personal relational knowledge. God's predestination is not about a deterministic decree, but about God's desire for a relationship with humanity, predestining a path for those who would freely choose to follow him. And I guess you might think like, what you might say, what would a Calvinist might say? Like, doesn't this interpretation undermine the text, which clearly states that God's predestination leads to justification and glorification? And I would say like, those who God predestines, he will indeed bring them to glorification. However, the emphasis is on the quality of the relationship between God and the individuals. God's foreknowledge is based on his intimate awareness of who will respond to his call, and his predestination is about shaping them into Christ's likeness, which is a relational process. And the sequence reflects the stage of a believer's journey in relation to God. It's not a rigid, deterministic process, but a description of the transformative relationship of God with those who he loves. So I don't know. I don't feel like that's. I think I need to probably work on that a little bit more. But I don't see. I gotta learn I gotta get my wording down a little bit better for that, because I kind of just kind of glossed over that last night. Thought a really good interpretation. See here, Ephesians. So it says, in him we are also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. Some of this language, it's like with the last one, I'd really like to like look at the Greek a little bit more closely. But yeah, because I have to understand what they mean by like, in him we were also chosen. having been predestined according to the plan of him. I'd have to probably read that whole full chapter, because I don't want to really give my thoughts on that, because the Calvinism is kind of a I've been studying a little bit, but mainly I've been just focused on the whole deterministic aspect of it, because to me, just from simple I guess just like logic, like I don't understand how what they're thinking about time and everything, how someone is actually saved if God also is determining them to, like, determine some to go to hell and determine some to go to heaven. And if God determined it, to me, it's like, well, the person was never in any real danger of going to hell, because everything's up to what God determined in the first place. And so it's kind of like a roller coaster. You get on it. It's like someone else could get on one roller coaster and it was fixed to where it's going to go off the rail and kill someone. My roller coaster, it looks very similar, but mine's never going off the rail. Or if it does, there was some other feature that was installed that put me right back on the rails and kept me going to meet my destination. So, but it was so carefully planned. It was like that was part of the ride to begin with, and it always got me to and I was always destined to go from point A to point B, that determined point. There was never a determination where I was in danger of going to anywhere else besides point B. It was always, I was going to hit point B. God perfectly planned it, and I was always going to hit point B. Whereas this other person, they were always perfectly planned to go to hell. It's like they were set on this track, and it went to point B, which was hell. And I don't see, like, they never had a chance to go anywhere else but that. And then on the other track, they had no chance to go anywhere but heaven. And so it's like, that's how it's really hard for me to even think of salvation as being a concept, just because of like everything's like oh yeah, I wish I could kind of remember some of the things Chris just said, but it's the whole concept of that everything has already been determined. So the only thing I could think of for salvation to be in Calvinism is God determined everyone to go to hell, then was like, you know what, I'm going to save a few. So I'm going to save a few from my previous determination, my original determination, which was to send them to hell. I'm going to save some. And so then he takes and decides to save some. And like, hey, salvation, I saved you from my original determination, which was going to hell. And in that case, I could see how there's real salvation, but at the same time, I know the Calvinist is going to be like, it starts to create all those problems that Chri Fisher brought up, which is, the Calvinists don't have a God that can make make a new determination or change his mind. He's kind of stuck with his original determination. It's like, what was it? Was that an imperfect determination then, that you just, because you determine one thing, then you go and determine something else at a whim? And why did you have that whim? And and it's like, if you start thinking about why he had that whim to save him after already determining him to go to hell, I just, and so these other passages, when I see this language about, in him we were chosen, having been predestined according to the plan, I have to really probably just read the Greek and actually think about a different way of interpreting that. And I'd like to have people like Chris and maybe Warren on to see how they would interpret these passages. So I do appreciate you bringing them up, because I do, because for me, I don't know. I'm just kind of going by just simple logic, and it just doesn't make sense to me that this concept of salvation can exist in Calvinism unless he's making these two different determinations. So I'm going to cut the show off soon, though, because I don't want to get I've talked to people who know Reformed theology. I mean, I've talked to C.J. Cox. It's just I feel like they haven't adequately addressed the whole determination thing, because it's like, anyone would think that when they just say compatibilism, it's a word that doesn't mean anything to me, because they don't seem to ever explain what that looks like or draw it out for me so I can get it. Because in my mind, and most people's mind, it's, people have free will. They determine things. They can make choices, and 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 it's like, we believe, a lot of people believe God allows people to have these choices that they freely make, and then and so then they have personal responsibility, which also means like the ability to choose Jesus for salvation. Because then it's like, when you go into these other verses, if you've got to have God determining you to have salvation, it's like, well, why is God pleading with them and things like that, or wishing for them to repent? The lost sheep parable that I brought up earlier, like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And be honest, Connor, I'd probably like to have you come on sometime and explain this to me, because this parable of the lost sheep, it's like, what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains and seek the one that is straying? But see, God determined that one to be straying, right? Because you say God determines everything. And if he should find it, assuredly I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep that he determined that would go astray than over the 99 that he determined that did not go astray. So even so, it is not the will of your Father, even though he just determined it, who is in heaven, that one of these little ones should perish. But he determined it. So, I mean, I have a lot of trouble with that, It's like, even so, it's not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. But that's fine. Hey, Connor, maybe we can do it like, in a month, and just kind of go over it, because I've had trouble getting any Calvinists to come on and it give me a chance to develop my thoughts, with some of these passages you brought up, and come to a better understanding. Because right now it's like, I just see like it's almost like God doesn't even exist in Calvinism to me. I mean, I know that sounds harsh, but it's just like the way I view it, and I'll just be blunt about the way I view things. Because he seems like he already determined everything. Everything's fixed, and it's almost like he's just kind of frozen with everything he's already determined, and unable, and he's like captive to every single thing he's already determined. And so Matt G says the lost sheep and the lost coin are the first two parables in 5-part series of parables. Well, Matt, if you want to come on here and explain it to me, and guys, I'm sorry about the way I am today, man. It's like, for some reason my brain feels like it's in a fog. But Matt, if you want to here, oops, I probably should put the link out here. I'll give you like a few minutes, man. If you decide you want to come on here and explain this, I mean, that's fine with me. And then I'll just shut the show down in 17 minutes. 2 hours is enough. I had Chris on, and that was good enough for my show. But let's see here. Man, I'm just trying to go back and read some of these notes or things that people were saying. how can I be blamed for my undevelopment team says, how can I be blamed for my actions? You just let me do whatever because God decided that I would. Yeah, see, that's another problem I have is like in determinism. It's like, well, if God determined everything I did, he determined me to say, he determined me to be wrong about Calvinism. He determined me to hate Calvinism. He determined me to think Calvinism is an attack against God. I mean, that's part of my problem because I feel like, well, even if I'm wrong, I'm right because God's determined me to say all these things anyway, and I'm held captive to what God already determined for me to think. And Matt, Jesus, the apostles were called unto a purpose. They were the ones killed all day long for the sake of the church. Undevelopment team says, but that's not an issue for me. It's an issue for believing that predestined is some sort of movie that God is watching. And hey, Von Erich. So Connor says, if God is making you sin, that's not Calvinism, that's fatalism. And my problem is I have trouble understanding the dividing line between the two because Calvinism does sound like fatalism. And when there's this video I made, this will come up on the screen because I don't really do a whole lot of Calvinism stuff. Or actually, I think it's more of a short. Or not a short, but a regular video. But
it's also a square. If it didn't
Look at this. This is a circle. All points are equal distance from the center, creating a constant curve. This is not a square, an enclosed object that has 4 equal sides at 4 equal angles.
You're just not considering that a circle has a property of a squared. So really it is a square and a circle.
No. Look at the definition of circle and look at the definition of square. A circle cannot be a square.
Again, yes, it does look like a circle and meets the definition of a circle, but you're overlooking that the circle has the squared property. Thus, while it is a circle, it is also a square. If it didn't have the squared property, I could see your point, but it does have the squared property.
What's the squared property?
It's a property that if an object has it, then the object is a square.
But it's not a square.
Yes, it is. It has a squared property. This is easy stuff. I don't understand why you don't understand this.
It seems to me that you're just begging the question and committing the definist fallacy at the same time in order to uphold this arbitrary standard that's contradictory and against the definitions.
You're just not as philosophical as me, so you don't understand.
Yeah, I think we're done here.
Read that we're bringing.
Emphasize the sovereignty of
okay,
God.
so here,
How do you keep out of the trap of fatalism?
this guy asked this
Listen,
question.
Talk, and you can hear the question for yourself. It's about fatalism, and listen to his answer.
Dr. Piper, as a Reformed theologian, when you emphasize the sovereignty of God, how do you keep out of the trap of fatalism, especially in your preaching, your practice, and your prayer?
How do I, as a Reformed theologian, avoid fatalism? And let's see if we can put a definition on fatalism. Fatalism, I take, would mean que sera, sera. If God wills everything, then what will be, and do what you want to do, or no point in praying, no point in evangelizing. You can't have any influence on the future or whatever. Is that roughly what fatalism would mean to you, or do you want to define it more closely?
Not so much as the looseness of it, but the logic when we emphasize the sovereignty of God is easy when you're following the 5 points of Calvin to go into that, well, what's going to be is going to be. We have the language of it when we discussed the predestination, when we discussed earlier, you quoted the scripture. They weren't of us, so they went out from us. So it would have never made any difference how much preaching they heard, how much witnessing. That doesn't absolve us from our responsibility. But needless to say, we come into this idea of what's going to be is what's going to be. How do you stay out of it?
Okay, The way I stay out of that is by being more biblical than reformed. That is, I don't draw inferences from theological, logical suppositions or assumptions. I go to my Bible and I look for verses and sentences and paragraphs that tell me the implications of God's sovereignty. They tell me. I don't think it up. Like if you tell me, well, if God predestines everybody, there's no point in praying. Or if God predestines, there's no point in evangelizing. I say, well, you can be that logical if you want. I'm being biblical.
Okay, so I think you probably.
All right. Hey, Matt, what's up, man?
How you doing, Chris, brother? Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Hey, do you need to bring up a screen or anything? Because you said you wanted to talk about Luke.
Yeah, I can't. You know what? I'm on my phone right now because the StreamYard requires Chrome, and all I have is Safari. So after today, I'm gonna put Chrome back on my desktop. But for now, I just have to talk to you on my phone.
Okay, so is it Luke 15 or which
Luke
one?
15. Yeah, this is part of the book that I wrote, Jacob and Esau, Two Nations and the Inheritance. I go over the 5
Oh,
parables.
wait, hold on. Did you say you wrote a book?
Yeah, I presented it to you in one of the chats, and you said maybe I'll have you on one day and present your book.
Oh, Jay, that's okay. Sorry, man, I forgot.
No, it's cool. It's cool. Yeah, no, definitely cool. You really got to read the book. It's I've been getting some reviews, and people are really digging it. It's basically, before we get into the 5 parables, this book is called Jacob and Esau, Two Nations and the Inheritance. And what I do is I go over I used to be a dispensationalist for 20 years. 10 years ago, I abandoned dispensationalism. And once I did that, I really started to see the Bible in a whole different way. Started to see a lot of the allusions that are in the Old Covenant, or the Old Testament rather, that point to the New Covenant. Jacob and Esau is one of them. So this explains Roman 9s like better than you're going to hear anybody explain it that I've heard so far. Because there are two interpretations of Romans 9:13. Jacob I loved, Esau have I hated, quoted from Malachi. Now, there's the non-Calvinistic view, and then there's the Calvinistic view. So the non-Calvinist will say, well, Jacob, it's definitely 2 nations that were in Rebekah's womb, according to Genesis, and those 2 nations have to be Israel and Edom, of course, because you have Jacob is Israel, Esau is Edom. Now that's talking, physical descendancy, of course. So, but the Calvinists, you know how they read it. They say that Esau is the elect. He represents the elect. Anyone who's ever been, chosen from before the foundation, from beginning of history till the end of till the judgment day, and that's Esau. And then they'll say that Jacob, of course, is anyone that God loves and is chosen. I'm sorry, I got it reversed. Esau is the non-elect. So that's what Calvinism sees Jacob and Esau as, and non-Calvinism, in my opinion, they're both incorrect completely. Because what the 2 nations that were in Rebekah's womb were actually, and I go through this extensively, they're Israel and the church. And that's going to be another topic for another day, because what's really going on is that Jacob and Esau is also an allegory, like Ishmael and Isaac. Paul talks about the allegory in Galatians 4, and he says that Ishmael, the firstborn son, is he's the son of the bondwoman Hagar, and Hagar represents Mount Sinai. And the scripture in Genesis 21 is, cast out the bondwoman and her son, that they shall not, he will not be heir with the son of the free woman. That's Isaac. So what Paul is doing in Romans 9 is he's saying Israel is not getting saved. What's going on? The Messiah came. He's sorrowful for that reason, but he also has the revelation now, like Ephesians 3:6 says that actually, yeah.
Oh, sorry, man. I accidentally hit a button and I started playing something. I started playing my Rumble podcast too, because I'm broadcasting on Rumble, and I was trying to check it to make sure I was keeping up with the chat over there. So I'm sorry about that.
Not a problem. And I'm trying to talk fast because this is very in-depth, very deep. We would have to spend probably 2 hours to go through it, but I'm trying to give you the gist. And it's basically that Paul is saying in the beginning of Romans 9 that Israel is not saved. He's sorrowful. The end of Romans 9 is, well, why is that the case? Well, it's because they sought after righteousness as if it were by the works of the law, but Gentiles who weren't seeking it have attained it. What you have in the middle is you have Paul's explanations of what's going on. He starts off with, it's not the seed of Abraham that are the children. That's referring to Ishmael. But in Isaac shall your seed be called. In fact, I'm working on a video right now. It should be out in a couple of days. I've got part 1 done. I'm working on part 2. It will explain all of this in slides and even a little drama from the movie Abraham and the movie Jesus of Nazareth. But what's going on is that Paul is trying to show that Israel is actually the firstborn of God. Exodus 4:22 says God tells Moses, that Israel is my firstborn. But Jesus becomes the only begotten. That's what's going on with Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn son. And what happens is Abraham believes that he's the heir for 13 years. And then God comes back to him again and makes a different promise. He changes his name. He gives him the sign of circumcision. And he says, now you're going to be the father of many nations. It's not one nation anymore. It's many. And it's going to be only through Isaac. So what Paul is doing is he's picking up on that allegory and he's saying, look, it's basically that we don't need to get saved by being a part of any nation anymore. It's through Jesus. And then that's the seed of Isaac is Jesus. Isaac is a picture of Jesus. Isaac is the only begotten son, according to God. He tells after Ishmael is removed from the house, now it's just Isaac. God tests Abraham and says, go up to Mount Moriah, sacrifice your only son. He's referring to Christ. Hebrews says that Abraham was, what did he believe? He believed that God was able to raise his only son from the dead. It's a complete and total picture of Christ. So as they're going up the mountain, Isaac is carrying the wood on his back. And he says, Father, we have the wood, we have the fire. Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham uses like a Hebrew play on words. He says, my son, God will himself provide the lamb. Again, a picture of Christ. So all Paul is doing in Romans 9 is very simply, he's saying, look, the reason that Israel is not getting saved is because that wasn't the plan from the very beginning. The plan was to have the new covenant come in and have Jesus allow everyone to come in and, like John says, have the right to become sons of God. And that's how we become, Romans 8, joint heirs with Christ. If children, then heirs, joint heirs with Christ. Excuse me. So I don't want to get into that whole thing now. You asked me about the parables. Now, in the book, after I describe what Jacob and Esau really mean, because, well, I'm going to have to tell you now really quick.
That's fine.
The allegory of Ishmael and Isaac is connected in Romans 9 to another allegory. It's not called an allegory, but Jacob and Esau is an allegory. When Paul said in Romans 9, and not only this, Rebekah had 2 sons. What he's doing is he's taken the allegory that he just used with flesh and promise, Ishmael being flesh, Isaac being promise. He's transferring it down to the next generation, and he's saying God hates Esau and loves Jacob. They are the 2 nations that were in Rebekah's womb. But what God was doing in Rebekah's womb is he was giving a picture of the old and the new covenants, just like with Ishmael and Isaac. So Esau actually represents Israel. Esau is also the firstborn who despises his birthright. That's Israel. How did Israel despise their birthright? We're talking national Israel now, not people. But this is thematic in nature. It's how God thinks, and God is saying, this nation of Israel, I'm going to shut that down. I'm going to create a new nation. And that's why Peter comes along and says, he quotes from Exodus, and he says to the church, you're now the royal priesthood and the holy nation. It's all about nations. When Jesus said to the Jews, therefore I say to you that the kingdom will be taken from you and given to a nation that bears the fruits of it. What's the nation he was talking about? The church. So that's what Paul's doing in Romans. He agrees with Jesus 100%. It's being taken away from Israel. It's given to the church. But anyone from Israel that believes all of a sudden became, in fact, the church started with the apostles, started with Israel. Gospel goes to Jew first and the Gentile. Now, this does lead into the parables, because in Luke 15 and 16, the reason why Jesus told the parables to begin with is because he was accepting sinners. And, you know, the ruling council there and the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they didn't like this idea. So they said, look at this guy, he's eating with the sinners. That's what prompts Jesus to tell the 5 parables, and people forget that. Jesus is about to show in the 5 parables that not only does he accept sinners, but they're going to enter the kingdom even before them. That's the whole theme throughout the New Testament. It's Gentiles who are going to get saved. That's what Paul says in Romans 9:30. Israel missed it. Gentiles got it. So he starts off with the 2 parables, the woman with the lost coin and the man with the lost sheep. Because they're only the 2 parables in a 5-part series, they don't really tell us that much. But what they do say is that when you find something that's lost, and it doesn't matter what it is at this point, you need to rejoice. And that's what each one does. When she finds the coin, she says, friends and family, let's have a party. I found what I lost. And the guy with the sheep does the same thing. The next parable is the prodigal son, of course. And now we have something that's lost, that's found as well. But now it's not a coin, it's not a sheep, it's a person. So the second son is lost. Now, this follows suit with the firstborn second son theme throughout the Bible, just like Ishmael and Isaac, Esau and Jacob. Now we have the older son and the younger son in the parable of the prodigal son. And what Jesus is doing is he's reiterating a prophecy that's told in the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. And I'll explain that as quickly as I can. So what you have is the second son is lost, but then he becomes found. And just like the sheep and the coin, now the father wants to have a celebration. Except the oldest son refuses to celebrate. He gets angry and he gets jealous. That's the prophecy that was given to Israel in Deuteronomy 32. And Paul quotes this in Romans 10:19. It'll tie right back into the nation theme. He says, but I say, did Israel not know? First, Moses says, I will provoke you to jealousy by those who are not a nation. That's Gentiles. I will move you to anger by a foolish nation. That's the church. The gospel is foolishness to Gentiles. So what's going on here is that Paul continues the treatise in Romans 10, and he's basically saying that Israel became angry and jealous. Remember the prophecy. God said to them, because you provoked me to anger with other gods, I will provoke you to anger and jealousy by a foolish nation. Now, if you go to Acts 13, you actually see this happening. Paul's going to, Antioch of Pisidia, and the Jews invite him to come back to the synagogue the following week, but they're basically rejecting the message, and Gentiles are getting saved. And what ends up happening is the Jews become angry and jealous. So this is the fulfillment of the prophecy. But what Jesus is doing in the parable is he's telling the Jews in parable form that prophecy in Deuteronomy 32 is about to happen to you. You're going to be made angry and jealous by the church that's now going to get saved. But the 5-part series, of course, doesn't stop there. The next parable is the steward who's about to lose his stewardship. Again, this is Jesus telling them that Israel, you were the stewards of my house. And now that you're about to lose your place, you need to go and make friends among the unrighteous mammon for everlasting habitations. This is everlasting life. So you can see the progression in the parables that Jesus is saying. What he's going to do in Lazarus and the rich man is he's going to take it a step further and make it a complete reversal. He's going to say that Abraham's bosom is a place of salvation. It's not a big ditch in the dirt. It's basically a metaphor for the new covenant where Abraham becomes the father of many nations through Christ. Remember, Jesus said at the Last Supper, "This is the blood of the new covenant shed for many." You know, the word "many" recurs throughout the Bible. It's the coat of many colors. What Joseph, another type of Christ, was basically the story shows that Joseph is the favorite of the father. The father gives him a tunic or a coat of many colors, but when Joseph's own brothers, you know, he came to his own and his own received him not. His own brothers rejected Joseph. They presented him as dead to the father with a coat of many colors doused in blood. That represents Jesus's blood covering the many nations. That's the coat of many colors. Isaiah says he will sprinkle many nations. Daniel 9 says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1:7. You know, the covenant with many for 1:7 is the new covenant. It's where Abraham becomes the father of many nations. So the last parable is Abraham is the father. It's not about the afterlife at all. It has nothing to do with money or the afterlife. It's basically saying that the rich man, who Jesus doesn't name, he's got 5 brothers just like Judah. So he represents Judah. He starts off dressed in fine linen and purple. That's the garb of the scribes and the Pharisees. He represents the nation of Israel, the Jews. Lazarus at the gate, his name is Eleazar in Hebrew. And Eleazar would have been Abraham's heir had he not had Isaac. So all these things mean something. In the end, they're reversed. And the rich man is put out of the kingdom, and Lazarus is put into the kingdom or Abraham's bosom. So that's what the 5 parables are about, quickly in a nutshell. And it's the problem. The reason why people don't get it is because they don't see what prompted Jesus to tell them in the first place that Jesus is about to accept sinners. So it's a picture of the church that's about to be born, and they don't see how the parable ends. You know, the rich guy says, well, Father. First of all, he calls him Father Abraham, so you know he's Jewish. And Lazarus is at the gate. You know, back then, in that time of Jesus, when a proselyte, or when somebody became a proselyte, they were called a proselyte of the gate. And that's why Lazarus was put at the gate. Ephesians, he was far off, and then he was drawn near. He represents the Gentiles. The rich man represents the Jews. And the fate of the Jews was coming soon. You know, 40 years after Jesus, of course, the Romans came and decimated the place as per the prophecies. And the parable ends with, if they don't believe Moses and the prophets, neither will they believe even if one were to rise from the dead. So can you see how nobody can know what the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin means unless you understand that it's just leading to the next parable to show you that there's now a son who's lost and he's found. And when he's found, the older brother gets angry and jealous. He represents, again, the oldest son is Israel. And that's what the whole thing is. The oldest son is supposed to get the birth right and the blessing, but it's always switched in the Bible. It's the theme of even with Ephraim, when Jacob or Israel finally goes to Egypt to meet his grandsons and to see Joseph alive after 20 years, he goes to bless Ephraim and Manasseh, and he switches his hands. And Joseph says, "No, Father, you have the wrong son." And he says, No, I know what I'm doing. He gives the second-born son, Ephraim, the firstborn son's blessing. and says that he will be the fullness of the nations or Gentiles. So, if I know that is pretty quick. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to kind of play this part again, man, because I think you brought up a lot of things that I never thought about before. As far as like comparisons and everything, and so yeah, especially when you made the comparison to like Israel and the and being the firstborn. Me personally, I don't know, maybe I'm just a lot more Bible dumb than anyone else, but I never thought about that before, so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it is basically, I call it the theme of the firstborn and secondborn, and it's basically a theme because when I used to be a dispensationalist for 20 years, and if somebody said to me that God was finished with Israel, I would have a heart attack. And now I realize, well, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about this. If God set up a corporation and like picture it as a business, and he calls it Israel, here's my corporation. It's filed on, at the county clerk, and it's called Israel. And then he says, and I have employees over there. But you know what? I want to start a new corporation. And I'm going to invite a lot of people to come in now and work for me. But I'm also going to invite everybody that's in the first corporation. And then he says to all of them, listen, you just got to abide by the new rules of the new corporation. I'm going to shut this corporation down. Well, that's what Israel compared to the church is. It's not that God, when Paul says, has God cast away his people? Dispensationalists take that the wrong way, and they say, well, God couldn't have cast away his people, Israel. Yeah, but Paul just spent 8 chapters trying to tell you desperately that his people is now anyone who believes in Christ. So, of course, he's not casting away his people, because his people are the ones that actually believe in the Messiah. The ones that rejected, well, they're the vessels of destruction. And 40 years later, they found out. There's no reason for a nation of Israel anymore. The church is now the holy nation of God. And so that's basically, if you read the book, you'll see it gets very deep. It's not that long. It's under 200 pages. And scriptural, references all over the place. It's really an eye-opener.
So do you think the similar things going on with Adam and being compared to Israel, and Jesus being compared to like Adam and Israel, and then Jesus and the secondborn? Is there something going on with that too? Some kind of comparison?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a comparison, but I don't know if it's the firstborn, secondborn. I think you could put that in the category of flesh and spirit. When God says to Nicodemus, when Jesus says to Nicodemus, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit, that's what he was referring to. Because most people take John 3:16 in a vacuum, and they don't understand what's going on. In John 3:16, Paul is talking to a child of Ishmael. Nicodemus is a son of Ishmael. And Jesus is standing there, and he's the fulfillment of Isaac, the promised son. So Nicodemus, being a child of Ishmael, now had to spiritually get out of that family and be born again into the child of Isaac, simply by believing in Christ. So John 3:16 is a comparison, and people forget the context. The context is, for God so loved the cosmos, not just Israel now. God so loved the whole world that he gave his only begotten son. Now that's a reference to Isaac. And remember, Israel was God's firstborn son, but Jesus became God's one and only. Remember the story when, so God appears to Abraham, and he says, you're going to have a land, you're going to have a nation, and you're going to have a son. So nothing happens for a while. He sleeps with Hagar. They have Ishmael. Abraham thinks Ishmael is his heir for like 13 years. God comes back, says, no, it's not going to be through Ishmael. It's going to be through Isaac. And basically what you're seeing in Abraham is the two covenants. God is giving us an allegory. So between the time that Abraham is called and the time that the nation of Israel is created, God is trying to show that there's going to be two kinds of children of Abraham. There's going to be the children of the flesh. There's going to be the children of the promise. And I'm going to show in my next video a whole slide of Romans chapters where it shows, flesh versus promise, spirit, letter versus spirit. That's the Romans contrast that I call it. And it's really, when you see it, you can't stop seeing it. It's basically just very, very simple. All Paul is saying is, hey, we have a new covenant now, and it's through Christ. Super simple. It's just that Paul is convoluted, and he doesn't want to come out and say, hey, God's finished with Israel. Those are his kinsfolk. He was sad for them. But he is basically saying, hey, I got the mystery now that Jew and Gentile are co-heirs and of the same body, Ephesians 3:6. So we don't need a separation anymore. We have, Hebrews 8:6 says that the new covenant is a better covenant built on better promises. So there you go. You have a better covenant, better promises, and Jew and Gentile are co-heirs and of the same body and partakers of his promise. There's no need for it in Israel anymore. It's very hard to get dispensationalists to see that, because dispensationalism is, to me, a complete brainwashing, kind of like Calvinism. It's once you get in there, it's very hard to get somebody out of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't really care for dispensationalism at all, just because I feel like they divide the body, because I think it's only supposed to be one body of people, and dispensationalism, it keeps feeling like they're dividing that body, and it seems like we're grafted onto one branch. You got the natural and the other branches, the wild branches, and they just get grafted onto the same vine. So it's got to be the same body. So when people start talking about dispensationalism and about how there's like two different promises and two different, it doesn't. I haven't been able to think of that in such a way where it feels like it's harmonious.
Right. So. And you hit it on the head. Were you ever dispensationalist? Because it's so prominent. It's everywhere.
Well, the thing is, I grew up I'm 49 years old right now, and so when I'm growing up, my grandma was watching 700 Club and all this other stuff. And that, what are you hearing? You're hearing nothing but dispensationalism and Daniel's 70th week is future. I never heard about it being anything else until I was about 40 years old. Yep. And so like, I feel like you're saturated with this, and so it's kind of like hard not to think that it's true, because why is everyone teaching it? Why is every single church I'm going to teaching it? Why is every single TV program I'm flipping on, radio program? I do a random search on YouTube about Daniel's 70 weeks. Oh, it's a dispensational spin on everything, so you tend to think that why would everyone be teaching this if this wasn't something widely accepted? Just Jesus died on a cross. Everyone accepts that. It almost felt just as natural, to accept dispensationalism. And then I'm like, and I never really thought that everyone could be so wrong until I started looking at things more and more, in the past few years when I've gotten more time. And I'm like, wow, man, it's like, I'm really starting to learn that a lot of this stuff that people make me think that's in the Bible isn't even there. So personally, I've really woken up especially the past 3 years, because I got a new job that allows me to watch YouTube while I work. So I'm listening at 2 times speed and listen to all these debates, and I'm like, wow, a lot of things aren't what I thought. I go back and read the Bible, I'm like, wow, really isn't even in here, so.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I've heard you, and man, you've learned quickly. I'll tell you that. And you're bright. It took me a long time when I was a dispensationalist, of course, same as you. I'm going to be 57 this summer. And I grew up listening to WMCA radio, and I was listening to, when he was a young guy, I was listening to R.C. Sproul, John MacArthur. All of these guys are dispensationalists. The only one who really wasn't was the Bible Answer Man, Hank Hanegraaff. He was one that I listened to as well, but he never talked about eschatology on the program.
Right, yeah.
Yep, now he does. And he's very good when he talks about it. He knows the deal. But it is a kind of a brainwashing. What got me out of it, I had left the whole church scene because I was finished with church, got saved in a Pentecostal, then I went to a Baptist, and I went to a non-denominational, and I don't know. It's a whole nother story. But once I was out of church, I was able to really just focus on the Bible. And I was reading chapter 9, Daniel, for the 1000th time. And I put this testimony at the end of my book. I literally heard a voice. And you know the guy, SoCal Preston Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I gave this testimony with him on Phelan McFarland's program.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him too.
And he will not let me live it down. Every time the guy sees me on chat, he starts making fun of me because he says, "Oh, you've heard from the Word of God." Well, this is the absolute truth. I was reading Daniel chapter 9 for the millionth time, and when I got to verse 27, I was praying this time. Like I was saying, God, please, I just want to know what this means. Give me clarity on this chapter. I was a full-on dispensationalist. No one could have convinced me of otherwise. And when I got to 27, he will confirm a covenant with many. I heard Jesus's voice say to me, "That's me." And I was like, I knew it was Jesus. It was the weirdest thing, but I just knew it. I wasn't afraid. And I literally said out loud, "No, Lord, that's the Antichrist." And I heard it again. "No, that's me." And that's it, brother. That's all I heard. I was going crazy. I went immediately onto Google. Who is the he? And the search bar finished it of Daniel 9:27. And I started to read that only in America. It's a phenomenon in America. N.T. Wright is baffled how all America believes dispensationalism. He's like, we don't believe that nonsense here in Britain. So I started to read how, like Matthew Henry, an old commentator, said, no, that's Jesus. And it makes so much sense. Jesus is the one that makes the covenant with many. Just like I said before, coat of many colors, sprinkle many nations, blood of the new covenant shed for many. Abraham, father of many nations. So I was convinced in an instant, because I knew that was the voice of Jesus, that the he in Daniel 9:27 was Jesus and not the Antichrist. Well, that set me on a completely, all I did was go back and just look at everything over again. And I couldn't believe the stuff that I was getting, like what I just told you about. A lot of it's in the book. Some of it is not, but I wanted to stick to the topic. And God just opened up everything. I know he wanted me to get out of dispensationalism and give me some truths. And I was doing hangouts with about 5 full preterists, trying to get me to become full preterist for quite a while. That's never happening. But I would tell them my ideas, and they kept saying for years, bro, you have to put it in a book. You have to put it in a book. And then one day I just started writing. And a year later, it's down. It's a little difficult to read because what I do is, in the book, I don't spell it out. I go through the 2 interpretations, the prominent ones, non-Calvinist and Calvinist, on Romans 9:13. And then I give my take. And then I show how the church is the nation of God now. So that's where the nation that, and it leads into, it just shows the truth of everything. Preterism, opens up and becomes evident. Dispensationalism falls off. Calvinism does. I have a good answer for Ephesians 1, John 6:44. Some of that's in the book. But this book is not about refuting Calvinism. It's really just about showing what Jacob and Esau means. And when you finally learn what Jacob and Esau means, it will debunk dispensationalism. The moment that you know that the whole idea with Ishmael and Isaac and then Esau and Jacob is that the firstborn son loses the inheritance to the secondborn, and then you realize that Israel, the nation, metaphorically speaking, is the firstborn, and then Jesus becomes the only. Now you know what Paul means when he says it's not seeds, but it's seed, Christ. That's where the promise is.
Now, this has been pretty interesting, man. I'm definitely gonna have to. I don't know what it is for my mind, man. My mind's having like some trouble following everything and thinking today. It's like in such a fog, but I think you said a lot of interesting stuff, man. That really makes me think, and so I'm going to be really interested into like listening to this again when my mind's more with it. But I love your story too about coming out of that, man. That's a really good story to hear too.
I appreciate that, because like I said, Dave, he could be a little belligerent, and he's very hard to deal with, I'll tell you, because I've had chats with him, and it's impossible. I don't know where his mind is, to be honest. He loves the Apocrypha. He thinks it's the Bible. I don't. He's a diehard dispensationalist. He doesn't see any of these truths whatsoever.
Yeah, it's amazing to me when people read Daniel 9. The problem with it is they're all, if you ever listen to a futurist talk, and just for people out there in my audience, I'm just what some would call a historicist or a partial preterist. I don't believe every single thing in the Bible is fulfilled, but I'm also open to that if that can be proven. But anyway, when you listen to someone who believes in dispensationalism or believes Daniel's 70th week is future, because I think there's some people that are not dispensational, but they'll still say Daniel 70th week is future. Have you ever noticed when they talk, it's like they always start from that last verse and then they jump around the whole entire Bible and say this means this, chapter Daniel 8 means this last few verses about this, that's about Antiochus Epiphanes is actually about the Antichrist, and it's not about Antiochus. And they'll mix that with 9:27, then take some verses in chapter 11 and 12 and mix that in, then jump over to Matthew, then jump over to Revelation. And it's like you never see them just walk you through from the beginning of it and what led to their thought process as they're starting from verse 1 and talking about everything. They get all the way down to verse 27. It's just all this hopscotching around. And I'm just like, I really would like a futurist at some point to walk me through it and how they came to that conclusion just by reading verse 1 through verse 1 through 27. And I bet you if they just slowly walked me through it, they'd start to kind of see some things, because it's like, well, what does that 70 weeks of captivity means? What was going on through Daniel's mind as he's praying? What's he thinking of? Once you start like really settling in on just what's going on in that chapter, and then you start to go, well, what does it mean by 70 weeks? And then if you start to actually think about the language, you're like, well, they were in 70 years of captivity from that Jeremiah's prophecy. It's almost over. So now you got 7 times 70. So, and then, okay, so if it's 70 times 70, 70 what? Well, he just came out of that 70 years. So it must be the same time, right? It's the same lunar solar years. So you take the same time scale, and you can't say it's a 360-day year. Because his only reference point is the Jewish reference of how they figure out time, which is the lunar solar calendar. So it's got to be a 354 or 384 day year. When you start to think about all this stuff, and then you start saying, okay, so now we know that it's got to be a lunar solar year that we're calculating. And then once you get to verse 26, if you see the word after, it's like, well, after the 69 weeks. So
that I will be cut off. Correct.
You only got one more week left. So is anything about the Messiah matching up to verse 9:24? Does the death on the cross accomplish anything in verse 9:24? Because if it does, it has to be in that 70th week. And I think, and I don't know why, like, just seeing that or hearing that question doesn't make them go, but
It's a
they
total, it's a brainwash. It really is. But I think a lot of confusion comes in with the 70 weeks. It doesn't really matter who gave the decree. It could be Cyrus, it could be Artaxerxes. It really doesn't even matter. What matters is that that this is a prophecy about two things. It's about the Messiah coming and the desolation of Jerusalem. And if you keep that in mind, you'll see what happens. And there is a gap. And I'm not 1,000% sure, but I'm going to give my take on it, because I believe that the 493 years, the 69 weeks takes you to the baptism of Jesus, and I believe his ministry is 3.5 years. I think that is the first half of the Shabuah, the first half of the 70th week. Then, like you just said, he's crucified after the 69th week, and that would debunk dispensationalism right there, because that would mean that if Israel's history is on hold when the 69th week ends, that means Jesus is crucified in the gap, and that doesn't work. He's crucified outside of their history. So, but it's not outside of it has nothing to do with their history. Their history actually ends in 70 AD. But what I think happens there is that you have Jesus's first half. His ministry is the first half of the 70th week, but you have a 40-year gap, and that's what throws everyone off. 40 years is the time of testing. It's like Jesus, and people, I have a chapter in my book where I show that Jesus actually replaces Israel, and I show that Jesus walks through the steps of Israel. Same steps. Israel was baptized out of Egypt have I called my son. Matthew quotes Malachi. I think it's Malachi. Yes. Or is it Hosea? It's Hosea 1:11. So Jesus quotes, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." Well, when Jesus was a baby and Herod was dead, well, then Matthew quotes that and says, this is to fulfill that prophecy. So Jesus is now fulfilling prophecies that were speaking about Israel. So Israel is baptized into the Red Sea. Jesus is baptized into the Jordan. Israel goes into the desert for 40 years. Jesus goes into the desert or the wilderness for 40 days. In the wilderness, Israel is brought to Mount Sinai and given the law. Well, after Jesus comes back from his 40-day, what does he do? He gives a Sermon on the Mount. And he speaks about the law, except this time he magnifies the law to the degree where they're all going, well, who then can be saved, type of thing. So what Jesus is doing is he's going through the steps of Israel, and he's showing, I'm the only one who can fulfill the law. That's why I'm the only son. That's why I'm the heir. And that's why Jesus is actually the replacement of Israel. Jesus wasn't forsaken on the cross. He was representative of Israel. My God, why have you forsaken me? It was the nation of Israel that was being forsaken. God was right there in Christ reconciling himself to the world. So God didn't leave Jesus on the cross. That's ridiculous. But the point that I was going to, which I kind of got off track, we were talking about the 70th week. The 40-year gap is between when the crucifixion and then the time that the desolation actually takes place. So if you put that 40-year gap in there in Daniel's 70th week, then you can see why the siege of Jerusalem, which Josephus talks about being 3.5 years, is the completion. It's the time of Jacob's trouble. If you don't put that 40-year gap in there, you think that the stoning of Stephen is like the end of the 70th week, which I can't even believe anybody believes that. There's no desolation. There's no desolation yet. Israel still exists. The temple's still there.
Well, see, me personally, I think it might be where it goes out to Nicodemus or is it Cornelius? Gosh, man, my mind's gone now. But and then so it's being preached to the Gentiles and everything. That's where I think it ends. But it's the way I read that verse 9:27. it's not so much that that has to happen within the 70 weeks. It's just that everything that's happened and then the Jews' rejection of what happened within the 70 weeks leads to that. Because I don't see, because the only thing to me in that prophecy that has to be accomplished is when it says 70 weeks are determined for these 5 or 6 things that are in that verse 924. So it's just mainly concerning those things happening within the 70 weeks. Anything else happening, like when I get to verse 27, I mean, I just see it as like that's what happened because of the Jewish rejection, not so much that it had to happen within the 70th week. Because me personally, I don't read that this has to happen immediately after or anything, but it does seem like it happens because of what went on in the 70th week. So that's just the way I read that whole the time frame, and also just because it says 70 weeks. Well, we know that these are like Shavuos, they're 7-year periods of time, and Jews always had like these like sabbatical cycles that always had to have 7 in it, and it's just to break a sabbatical cycle doesn't sit well with me. That's why I don't like to divide it in half and say, and then I also just don't see a reason to have to do that. It looks like the text allows me just to interpret it the way I'm interpreting it. And I just see 70 sabbatical cycles of, so it's like 70 7-year periods of time because it's a week of years. And it's like, it just seems weird for me to break up a week, because then that also means you're breaking up. It's like breaking up a day and a half. So you're breaking up a year and a half, since it's a 3.5-year ministry. So I'm just throwing that out there as like why.
Yeah, yes. Well, think about this, brother. If the prophecy was about the Messiah coming and bringing the desolation of Israel and then bringing in the new covenant, imagine if there really was no break. Well, then Israel wouldn't have a space to repent. See, the veil was partially lit. There was a blindness, according to Isaiah 6, put on the nation. And in Isaiah 6, Isaiah asks God, how long? And he says, until the city be without inhabitant. So the blindness of Israel was to last until the city was actually destroyed. But what Paul writes is that whenever, there was a veil. When Moses is read, there's a veil that covers their face. But whenever one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now it's individual. It's not national anymore. It's a partial. That's why in Romans 11, it's a partial and a temporary blindness. Some people think that there's a remnant of Israel today, or that Israel is still blind today. No, that's nonsense. The reason why Israel doesn't believe today is the same reason why many Gentiles don't believe. It makes no difference. There's no difference, Paul says in Romans 2:10. There's no difference between the Jew and Gentile anymore. But without that space, you wouldn't have had the 40. Do you think it's coincidence that the book of Acts is roughly 40 years long? I mean, think about that. From Jesus's crucifixion to the desolation is about 40 years.
I didn't even know that book of Acts was that long. I never thought about it. I knew parts of it had it was about 19 years afterwards, but I haven't calculated the whole thing to realize that it was 40 years long.
It's not exact, but when you think about it, 30 AD, the crucifixion, 70 AD, the destruction, that's 40 years. So Israel was given this, so the Messiah is crucified, the new covenant is established, the temple is there, and what is, obsolete is ready to vanish, like Hebrews says, but it's still there. And then the apostles, who are the remnant, they were chosen, Ephesians 1. Going back to Calvinism, the apostles were chosen. They were the predestinated. You have to follow the personal pronouns throughout Ephesians 1 until you get to verse 13, where it switches to you. And you believed when you heard their words, which is a parable of the Gethsemane prayer in John 17, where Jesus prays only for the apostles. And then in verse 20, he switches and says, now I pray for all those who will believe their words. It's a parallel to Ephesians. So this is where Calvinism gets mixed up. They see the predestination and they think, well, that's applying to everybody. No, it's the apostles who were given the mysteries of the kingdom, and they were the first to hope in Christ, like Ephesians 1:12 says. And so they were the remnant. They were 12. I talk about a little bit. I have a chapter called The Remnant. I haven't opened my book in a while, but I talk about how there are pictures and shadows, like in John 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000. The remnants of food are placed into 12 baskets. The remainder of food is placed in 12 baskets. And then Jesus stands before them and says, only those, who the Father gives to me will come to me. And again, Calvinists are taking that way out of context. He's talking about the apostles standing right next to him. These are the ones, and that's proven in John 17 when Jesus prays and says, Father, the ones that you gave me, I have lost none save Judas, that the scripture be fulfilled. Then the next chapter in 18, Jesus gets arrested. And what does he say? He says, you found me, let these go. And John writes that the saying, not the prophecy, but the saying, because Jesus had said this, of all you have given me, none will be lost. So those were the apostles. They were the quote, the remnant. And the blindness was there partially and temporarily until that city was destroyed. And when you have the city destroyed, that is the end of the old covenant, the nation of Israel, no more blindness. And now you have the church. But I don't see how Daniel's 70th week can play out without that 40-year space to repent, which the letters to the 7 churches talk about. By the way, I think that Mystery Babylon was ancient Jerusalem. That's another hot topic, but I don't write about that in my book. But I have scripture proof that shows that Mystery Babylon was ancient Jerusalem. That's what those prophecies are all about. Only no prophet can die outside of Jerusalem, and Mystery Babylon is the one that kills the prophets.
I'm just out of curiosity. So, are you full preterist or partial preterist?
No, partial. I take 1 Corinthians 15 in chronological order. The dead in Christ will rise first. We which are left and remain will be caught up. And then the kingdom is handed over to the Father. So the kingdom, I have a chapter about this in my book. The kingdom is the new covenant. That's why Paul doesn't really say there's a kingdom coming. He basically says the kingdom of God is righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost. That's the kingdom of God according to Paul. According to Jesus, it's a dragnet that gathers all kinds of fish and is separated at the end. It's a wedding where the original guests refuse to come, so that strangers and have to be invited from the highways and the byways. It's a mustard seed that starts out small and keeps growing and growing. Everything Jesus said about the kingdom describes what we've been in for the last 2,000 years. But in 1 Corinthians 15, that kingdom is handed over to the Father at Jesus' second coming. So, and then I don't even think anyone ever goes to heaven. I believe that the earth is recreated, and the meek shall inherit the earth.
Yeah, I'm pretty open about that because that's after I realized that how much I have been just saturated by dispensationalism. I don't trust anything that I believe. So I'm trying to reread the whole entire Bible all over again and reformulate every single thought in my mind all over again because I thought about it a certain way, but now I'm like questioning, like, okay, when I thought about it and I came to these conclusions, what else was going on in my mind? So I have to rethink about all this stuff, and I probably would lean as far as right now, probably I feel like I lean towards that view that you just shared, but I'm not saying I'm 100% on it. But I feel like I lean more towards that, making more sense to me. But
yeah, I mean, I believe in a physical resurrection. I think Paul said, don't sorrow for those who have 1 Thessalonians, for those who have fallen asleep. For if you believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, even so will God bring with him. The dispensationalists think that that is saying that Jesus is going to bring saints down from heaven. That is not what it's saying at all. What it's saying is, don't sorrow for them because they'll be resurrected. If you believe Jesus was resurrected, even so, God will bring with Jesus out of the grave those who sleep in Jesus. I believe in that heresy called soul sleep, and I think it's abundantly clear throughout the Bible that we sleep until the resurrection, and you wouldn't even know it. Jesus said, Peter said about David, his tomb is, when he was trying to convince the Jews, look, it's not David. You're looking for David. It's Jesus. I'm telling you, it's Jesus. He's the king. And David's tomb is, David's dead and buried. His tomb is with us to this day. When Peter said that, David was where? Sleeping. And how can you sleep in Jesus? How can you be saved and yet sleeping? So that's why, people reject soul sleep because, who believes in it? The Mormons or the Seventh Day Adventists?
Seventh-day Adventists are the ones that really give that doctrine a horrible name, just because, they are what they are.
I think it's true, because Paul says, if there is no resurrection, then those who have fallen asleep have perished. Well, if they're in heaven, that would be a lie. He's literally saying, if they're not going to be resurrected, Jesus descends, we rise. I don't know where people get this idea that we descend with him, except for that one verse that they take wrong, 1 Thessalonians 4. So I kind of have my own systematic. Once I started reading the Bible through again, everything started to fall in place, at least for me. I can say it and see what people think about it. But I would love for you to read the book, because you got a keen mind, and I think you're going to understand everything in there. Do you have it on the screen?
Yeah, I put it on the screen for you so everyone can know.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I can't enlarge it. Oh, there. Well, I didn't mean to enlarge it like that, but it's about the most I can enlarge it.
If you notice, I have the hands spread out. I have Jesus' hands reaching out, and I have the two thieves' hands reaching out. And you'll see why. It's a very deep concept. The two thieves on the cross actually represent Jew and Gentile. And what God is doing is he's reconciling Jew and Gentile together. When he's in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, for he is our peace, who has made the two, Jew and Gentile, one. That's a quote from Ezekiel 37. The two sticks of Ezekiel 37 were not the northern and the southern tribes of Israel. That was actually a prophecy of Jew and Gentile coming together, and that's why Paul quotes it. It's not referenced in your Bibles, but when he says, for he is our peace, who has made the two one, he's talking about the two sticks of Ezekiel 37. And most people think that if you look at that prophecy, on one stick is written for Judah and for Israel. Judah and Israel are already on one stick. The other stick is for Joseph and Ephraim. And remember, I told you about the blessing that went to Ephraim being the fullness of the nations. Well, Joseph is a picture of Christ. Ephraim is a picture of the nations. Written on the other stick is a prophecy about the new covenant and the Gentiles. And people might say, well, why didn't God just prophesy that? Well, he wanted it to be a mystery. That's the reason why Paul says, I'm going to tell you the mystery now that was made known only to me. This mystery is that Jew and Gentile have become one. Before me, nobody knew that. So you go back, you read all the Old Testament prophecies, and you think God's talking about the northern tribes being reunited with Judah. No, God was using the split nation to prophesy about Jew and Gentile coming together, but while keeping it a mystery the whole time. That's the reason why Paul quotes so many Old Testament prophecies, because he's trying to show, now I get it. Jesus showed me what those old prophecies mean, and now I'm telling you what they mean. So the two thieves on the cross, one of them represents Jews, and what a Jew might say if he knew that his fate 40 years later was going to be, the way that it was. He says, Jesus, if you are the Messiah, save yourself and us. And the other guy says, don't you fear God even when you're about to die? Now, that's what Esau said to Jacob when he wanted that bowl of soup. He said, I'm about to die. So he says, don't you fear God even when you're about to die? And then he says, we deserve what we're getting. In other words, all have fallen short of the glory of God. But this man has done nothing wrong. So he's proclaiming the sinlessness of Jesus. And then he turns to Jesus and says, Jesus, remember me, Gentiles, when you come into your kingdom. You see how that conversation is God put there for a reason?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, that's really interesting. Because I there's a lot of little details that just dawned on me when you said all that.
Yeah. So that's the reason why I have the two hands. If you turn the book around, you're going to see the covenant God made with Abraham with the smoking fire pot going through the severed flesh. Well, and then you're going to see a long path with the three crosses in the distance. So what I'm showing is that the covenant made with Abraham was a prophecy about Calvary 2,000 years later, and now it's being fulfilled at Calvary in the crosses and in the darkness. Remember, Abraham. It says in the King James, it says a horror of darkness fell, and then God put Abraham to sleep, and then God Himself in the fire pot passed between the severed flesh. Well, that's a picture of Calvary. Now, 2,000 years later, you have God in the form of a man in between the severed flesh of humanity, Jew and Gentile. And what's he doing? Daniel 9. He's confirming the covenant made with many. See how it all ties together? So Jesus is confirming the Abrahamic covenant on the cross, and it even looks like it. The darkness comes down, just like when Abraham. And how does Abraham become the father of many nations? Through the cross. So now according to Daniel 9, Jesus is confirming that covenant on the cross. And when does he inaugurate it? 50 days after first fruits. So Jesus is killed on the 14th of Abib on Passover. He's put in the tomb on the next day, and he's in the tomb on the Feast of Unleavened Bread because he's the sinless Lamb of God that sees no decay. And then you count 50 days. It's the counting of the Omer. You count 50 days from first fruits, and that brings you, you count 49 days rather, 7 weeks. And then the very next day is Pentecost or Shavuot. And on Pentecost, that's the Jubilee of Jubilees. That's the 50th. That's when the Holy Spirit comes and inaugurates that covenant that was confirmed on the cross. So it all ties into to Abrahamic covenant and to the prophecies and the 7 sevens and the Jubilee. And Shavuot is 2 Hebrew words. It's Shav, which is for Sabbath. It's 7. And it's Ot, which means sign. So you have Shav and Ot. What's Shav and Ot? If you put it together, it's the sign of the 7s. So the sign of the 7s is Pentecost or Shavuot. There's so many things going on that God has in there, so deep. It's kind of crazy. Think about the sign of the Sabbath. What's the sign? When was the Sabbath fulfilled? So God appears to Israel. They're murmuring and complaining because they're hungry, and God's manna comes down, and God tells them, I want you to pick up just enough for each day, but on the 6th day, pick up a double portion and the rest on the 7th. And this is going to be the sign, oath, between me and you. And what they didn't know is that manna come down from heaven was a picture of Jesus. That's why Jesus comes in, he says, I'm the bread. Your forefathers, John 6 again, your forefathers ate the bread and they died. Well, you got to eat this bread instead. So Jesus was going right back to Exodus 16 and saying, I'm the Sabbath rest, but you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. An oat, if you look at the word, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I looked into the words. If you looked at the word, it's Aleph, Vav, and Tav. That's oat. Aleph is obviously the first, Tav is the last. Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. In Hebrew, he's the Aleph and the Tav. And then, but oat has a Vav in the middle. So if you look at the pictographic of Hebrew, the Aleph is a silent, the first letter in Hebrew is always silent, and it's drawn as an ox head, like an animal. The Tav is drawn as a T. It looks like a cross. It's where we get tabernacle, tavern. It's Tav. It's God tabernacling with us. But the Vav looks like a peg or a nail. So if you take that word oat or sign and apply it to the Sabbath or apply it to the circumcision, because that's what God said to Abraham, now I'm going to circumcise you. What's circumcision? It's the cutting off of the flesh. What was cut off? What's Ishmael called? What does Paul call Ishmael? He's the son of the flesh, right? Wasn't he cast out of the house? What is that? That's the cutting off of the flesh. That Israel was cut off because they're of the flesh to bring in the spirit. So on the day of Pentecost, the flesh was being cut off and the spirit was being brought in for the new covenant. So Aleph, Vav, Tav, if you look at the ancient Hebrew pictographic, it actually gives you a prophecy. It says it looks like a silent sacrifice nailed, that's the Vav, to a cross. Aleph, Vav, Tav. Silent sacrifice nailed to a cross. So the word oat in Hebrew pointed to a silent sacrifice nailed to a cross. Jesus is the Sabbath, and Jesus fulfilled the sign of Abraham of circumcision, cutting off of the flesh. I still can't believe people want to follow the Sabbath today. It's okay, but it's not necessary. It's Jesus is the Sabbath, and the book of Hebrews says that, Hebrews 4, that this is something now that you don't observe, you enter into it. It just means that you're resting in Christ. It was ironically put as the fourth commandment, and I think it's there because God was putting into that law the thing that would eventually obliterate the law. It's like the ticking time bomb in that law that says that once Jesus comes, the law is gone. Now it's you believe in Christ, you get the Holy Spirit, the law is written on your heart. That's the Holy Spirit. But I know it's a lot. I hope I'm not talking your ear off.
I mean, most of that, there's a lot of interesting things you said. Definitely a lot to consider, and I think I agree with a lot of what you said. Just the Sabbath part, because I am a Sabbath keeper. I observe the Sabbath. And,
that's totally cool. Yeah. But so you don't believe? Do you believe you need for salvation, or you just do it because you feel like it's supposed to be done?
Man, to be honest, I'm still thinking of all the whole conditional argument and things like that, because I was brought up in a Church of Christ, and they did teach more of a conditional salvation, and it was only recently where I started hearing free grace and things. So I'm open to it, and can kind of like thinking about everything. So I'm not gonna say you have to. I don't know what you got to do to be saved besides believe in Jesus Christ, because he did represent. It does say in like Daniel 9:24, he's going to make an end to sin. Well, what does that mean? So it's got me rethinking a lot of things that I was brought up believing, because I'm like, well, if he's putting an end to sin, what exactly does that mean? Because if an end of sin got made, is that like Jesus is like the ultimate sacrifice, and as long as you accept him, acknowledge that he was sinless and perfect, and that he's the Son of God and rose after 3 days, then I don't know what I mean. It sounds like there's like, you don't have to go kill a lamb, you don't have to go do this, you don't have to go do that to go get saved, and so now I'm like, is it just abiding then, or is it just or you abide in him, but it doesn't have to be perfect because you still have him as your advocate, so all those things are going through my mind, still trying to sort all that out. So to me, it's like more like keeping Sabbath is just like a respect thing. It's also, I don't like the Catholic Church. And so it's also like saying I'm not going along with what man's teaching me. I'm going to go along with what God's teaching me. It's a thing like ever since I started keeping it and just keeping it out of faith, because the first thing I had done to me when I decided to keep the Sabbath was a week later, my boss decides to change the schedule. Well, now suddenly when you change the schedule and you have me work one extra day when we're busy, you're demanding I work on the Sabbath, because that would be the extra day. So now I go, well, I can't work that day because I believe I'm starting to keep the Sabbath. And then so my boss is threatening my job almost as soon as I decide to start keeping it. He switches the schedule. It is out of the blue. And so I was like, look, man, if you got to do whatever you got to do, and I'm just going to let God take care of it. Like, I'm just going to have this walk of faith, right? So in a way, it's like God's, you could still say Jesus is my Sabbath, and I'm still keeping, observing the Sabbath, and I'm still like out of faith. I'm like, I'm just going to try to do what you said, and I'm just going to try to keep this day holy the best I can. And it's like, and things have worked out, because even the job I got now, it was all only because of keeping the Sabbath. And it's not because my boss favors me keeping the Sabbath. It's because it was the only job available that would let me keep the Sabbath. And I thought it was a crummy job when I got it 3 years ago. And as soon as I got the job, for the first time in 20 years, they decided to give everyone a $30,000 pay raise. So I'm sitting here going, oh, I got this crummy job. I lost all this vacation that I had at my other job. Why should I even walked away? And then suddenly, that comes out of the blue. And like I said, it was only because that's the only job that would work with me and keeping the Sabbath. So it's like things have just kind of naturally worked out for me. And I feel like, I never saw the seventh day be made unholy. It was sanctified, and who sanctified it? Believe in John 1, it says through who Jesus, all things were made. And so if he made all things, and he also was there the creation week, he made the seventh day, he sanctified it and blessed it. And he even says he's the Lord of the Sabbath. And I never hear in the entire Bible him being declared the Lord of Sunday. And I'm just like, and I hear the Catholic Church saying Sunday's the Lord's day, and it just doesn't sit right with me. So I kind of keep it just as an acknowledgement that you, God, are the creator. You create everything. I depend on you to sustain my life and everything. And that's more or less why I do it. It's just to show complete rejection of the Catholic Church, which to me, it just kind of embodies, like, are you going to follow the teachings of man or the teachings of God? Are you going to try to follow tradition, or are you going to try to follow God? So that's just kind of where I see everything. And then I also see what they did to Polycarp. That was like the Roman bishop Anicetus that says, hey, why don't you keep Easter Sunday? And I know the words are all interchangeable, but basically when I say Easter, I mean the Sunday tradition of celebrating, of changing Passover to Easter, basically. And I think that's where this whole Sunday observance starts to come from, because I don't think you would have it otherwise. So, and when I see that, and I just see that, I don't see that in the Bible. And yet I see Polycarp doing the things which I do see in the Bible, but I don't see the Roman bishop Anicetus doing those same things, doing things that I can see in the Bible. That's just where I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm on the right track until someone can show me something better. So
yeah, totally cool. I think God would honor that for sure. But I see it as a sign. I think, and I see it as something that was given to Israel, but I see it as something that was given to Israel to point to Christ. And I think that when it says, he is our Sabbath rest, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. And I think it was basically it's basically a prophecy. It's a prophecy of the new covenant, because what is the penalty of the Sabbath in the Old Testament? It's death. If you profane the Sabbath, the penalty was death. If you bring that over to the new covenant, there'd be a lot of dead Christians. But what is the penalty now in God's mind if you don't adhere to the gospel? Well, you're not going to have eternal life. You're going to have eternal death. I'm a conditionalist, by the way. I don't believe in eternal conscious torment. But that's why I see that the Sabbath to me was just something that God said to Israel, like, and it's something that they would, every time that they celebrated or observed, I should say, the Sabbath, they were proclaiming that the Messiah was going to come and give them rest from the law. That's how I view it. So when Hebrews says we enter into it, the new covenant never says we observe it. It says we enter in. Well, you can't enter into a day. What you enter into is the positional place of I'm saved now, sanctification.
Well,
So
see,
that's the way I think.
enter into that rest, though, the way I would interpret it is that we no longer have to do all these sacrifices. We don't have to do all this work, because I mean, that was constant. You know, you're butchering animals like twice a day, every single day almost, as far as I know.
Yeah.
I can't remember those special holidays and what they would do. I can't remember if it's more or less, but they're just butchering. You just got bloodshed and more bloodshed, just pouring blood, you know, all through the whole year, you know, just over trying to cover up your sins, you know. So I always kind of thought that might be what the entering into his rest means. So
Yep.
just throwing it out there. I'm not saying I'm right either, you know. Like I said, I'm trying to think of, I'm trying to go through the whole Bible all over again. That's why I appreciate having guests like you on and Chri Fisher and all these people that are like making me, you know, bringing all these thoughts to my attention. That way, when I go read all the Bible again, I got this in mind as I read it, and I go, well, is this you know what Matt said? Is this really there? Is what Chris said? Is this really here? Is what so and so said? You know, and so that's kind of how I'm approaching it. So right now, it's like I'm kind of like listening to a lot of people, and I'm kind of not, I'm reading the Bible a little bit, but it's real slow. But I'm mostly focused on, I just want to make sure when I come back to the text again, that I like my mind's like it's not, it's ready to receive as much as possible when I read the text, instead of, you know, having like, you know, these assumptions that I thought was true just because you're hearing it your whole life, you know, and I'm just trying to break out of that and then read the Bible with the freshest eyes possible.
I mean, that's the best way you could be. I agree with Chris 100% about the open theism. So I've been an open theist probably for like 10 years now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And the one difference, you know, a lot of open theists, I think, make the mistake of not acknowledging the predestination that did take place.
Yeah, see, that's what I get tripped up on. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, so, there's plenty of predestination.
Go ahead, man.
What's that?
I said, if you want to elaborate a little bit on that point, you can feel free, because that's what I was kind of struggling with the most as I'm trying to figure this out. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with Chris 100%. God is not outside of time. That's impossible. God is certainly within time, you know, half an hour space in heaven at the right time. Jesus was born. So many things. And I think God interacts with us in time. God is, let's put it this way. He is eternal, but not timeless. So there are things that quite obviously were predestined, like the cross itself. I mean, nobody can believe. I don't think any open theist would go this far as to say, in fact, Bob Enyart did. I've heard Bob Enyart say, who I think might be passed now, but I heard him say that even the cross happened because due to man's free will. And I'm like, no. It's called prophecy. We really have to understand what the Bible means by prophecy and prophetic. So go back to like what I was talking about with Ishmael. If Ishmael was a true picture of Israel and Isaac was a picture of Christ, was God just going to hope that in man's free will there would be a son of God come and he would get crucified on the Passover? That'd be a pretty big feat. No. having a guy, betray him for 30 pieces of silver. No, these are prophecies. And when God says this will happen, and I think Chri Fisher would agree with me on this, it's not that God is looking into the future and saying, I know that that's going to happen. What he's doing is he's saying, I'm going to make that happen. How can God make something happen unless he's predestining it and messing with people's free will? Not as a rule. That's the key. In order to make prophecy happen, God has to do some kind of manipulation to some degree. And that means at that moment, somebody might not have a completely free will. Maybe it's not their whole life. Maybe it's just, hey, I need Cyrus to decree that you can go and rebuild the temple. Well, did he do that of his own volition? No way. See what I mean? So God, if you look at prophecy properly, it's God saying, I'm going to make this happen. And sometimes he puts contingencies. Well, if Nineveh repents, I won't destroy them. So God gave a prophecy. I'm going to destroy it unless they repent. So there's, you see what I'm saying? So, but I don't think that continues after the cross. That's the key. I think that the apostles were chosen. Aren't you the 12 whom I have chosen? They were literally, follow me. They had no choice. Jesus chose the apostles, and they dropped everything like robots. And that's what Paul says in Ephesians 1. In order that we who are the first to hope in Christ might be for the praise of his glory, the apostles were predestined to be apostles. But but what the Calvinist does is he takes all of that predestination, which is really obvious, and then he just extrapolates it to all of human history. Why? Where does it say that? Just because the apostles, there were 12 apostles chosen to take the place of the 12 tribes, obviously. Does that mean that God knows what shirt I'm going to put on tomorrow? Like, where's the correlation? It doesn't make sense. So prophecy needs to be viewed like this is God saying this is going to happen and then making it happen unless he changes his mind, because God repents all over the place in the Bible. So there you go. You have God knowing what's going to happen when he determines it's going to happen. And then when he doesn't determine something, well, he leaves certain things up to man's free will. And how is God going to know, even God, what the future is when the future doesn't exist in a free will system that he decided to set up in the first? If God wanted to determine everything, he could. But what's interesting? There's a phrase that James White says all the time. He says the most consistent Arminian is an open theist. Because what he's trying to say is, if you're going to believe that God knows the future, hold on. I'm kind of. Are you tracking with what I'm trying to say? Because
if God knows the future perfectly and he can't gain any knowledge, because if he was to gain any knowledge, that would inquire that he didn't have perfect knowledge. Something
right.
to that effect.
Correct. Right. So it's really a combination. Like you get these Molinists like William Lane Craig, and what they try to do is they come in and they say, okay, we have to take the foreknowledge of God, which I believe, foreknowledge of God, it's like foreknowledge of God, and then we have to take man's free will, and we have to figure out how they go together. So let's look at what De Molina said in the 1500s, whoever made the guy named after Molinism. And let's take what he said, the Jesuit priest, by the way, and let's put that together. So Molinism says that man has free will, and yet God knows the future at the same time. And then they come up with this middle knowledge stuff to try to inner workings. God knows all possibilities of possibilities, and down the chain. I mean, this is just nonsense. Why not just say, here's how we parse out what we see in the Bible as appearing to be determinism, and then the other 90% of the Bible, it appears to be man's free will. It's because only a couple of things were predestined. When God says, when Paul writes in Ephesians and Romans 8, which are the only two chapters that have the word predestination in them, when he says predestined unto a purpose, that's what you have to understand. God had a specific purpose in predestining 12 apostles. And I think Paul is the replacement, not Matthias, but that's another story. So that's God is predetermining things for a purpose. Everything else now it's up to you to believe. The new covenant is established. Christ was crucified. He doesn't need to manipulate anything for anything else to happen. Now it's just we need to follow the law of Christ, obey the gospel, preach the gospel, and be disciples of Christ. And that's of our own. So that's the way I view it.
I'll have to kind of chew on that a little bit. But I appreciate you let me know. I mean, it sounds like it makes sense to me. I still need to chew on it though.
Yeah. But do me a favor, because my voice is running out. If I talk too long, I end up with no voice.
I need to kind of cut this show out anyway, because I don't want to go much over 3 hours. So.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite, and totally impromptu. I'm actually very camera shy. I don't like being on camera.
Oh, you did awesome, man. I loved it. I mean, I think you made a really good presentation of a lot of your thoughts, and it's interesting. It's definitely thought-provoking for me. So
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you coming on, man. It's like nice. I got 2 authors just to randomly come on my show in one day. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, just happened
to laid out a lot of knowledge for me. So
I'd love for you to get the book and let me know how you want. You can't post your email on YouTube; they delete it. It's on Kindle, but I don't expect you to spend 16 and change. I could, if I get your email, I could email you a draft, an electronic draft.
Okay, I go ahead and give you that. Because I think I got like a the private chat. Here we go. Yeah, I can just let's see here. I don't want to give this out to everybody else, so that's why I'm kind of just dropping it in the back room. Oh, you left. Oh. Well, Matt, I tell you what, I don't even know if you can see the back room now. So I'll get a hold of you somehow. I'll figure it out. I might just buy your book. I mean, I don't think it's like a huge deal. I'm gonna probably get you and Chris's book. I definitely appreciate what you had to say, and I appreciate you, Connor. I know you sound like a Calvinist. I don't know if I misunderstood what you're typing and everything, or maybe you're just like throwing out Calvinist talking points and making me respond to it. But I appreciate the things you brought up, and things people gave me to look at and chew on. I appreciate all my guests that came on the show. And I'm just going to end the broadcast, and thanks everyone for watching. And sorry about me not being with it. I got this weird headache, and it's putting my brain in kind of a fog, and I'm not feeling very sharp. So I'm really sorry about that today. And I hope everyone has a blessed day, and thank you.